What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Lights Out. I'm your host, Josh.
And I'm your host, Austin.
And I'm Daniel.
We're back with another one today. A case that is, one that I feel many have either forgotten about or have never heard of before, surprisingly.
Yeah. Even though it's a pretty
well-known,
high profile, yeah.
Absolutely, especially at the time that this all happened. We're going to be covering the Chris Benoit case, and this is a very dark and tragic story. If you're not familiar with Chris Benoit, he was really one of the greatest icons in wrestling history. In the WWE world, WWF, there's a lot of different leagues that he participated in over the years, but he was at his height of his career. He was on top of the world, one of the best to ever do it.
Yeah, he won a world championship title too.
Yeah. And so, this story is, one of, I think there's several lessons in this one, but basically, if you're not familiar with Chris Benoit, he reached the height of his career. He had everything going for him. And then all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, he murders his wife and his son before taking his own life. And, there's a lot of layers to this one and a lot of different sort of perspectives to look at it. Because according to everybody that knew him, his, other family members, his other son that is still alive, he was a gentle giant. He's this humble, hardworking guy, a great father. And then this happened. And it's one of those cases that is really hard to wrap your head around and understand. And we may never understand why he did what he did. But yeah, today's episode is going to be very dark, very heavy. But I think it's an important one to cover because I think there's a lot of things that sadly, as a result of what happened, we learned a lot of things about CTE, substance abuse, but also taking a look at what an utter piece of trash the WWE was and even still is, some would argue, in the way that they treat their athletes, as well as how do they regulate the substances that they use, and steroids plays a big part in this case. So
the lack of safety and protection they had for their entertaining wrestlers, it was pretty abhorrent.
Yeah. I mean, the CTE issue with physical sports, physical contact sports, especially wrestling, MMA, football, rugby is probably another one, but it's really something that was not known. Like we didn't know that much about it for a long time, and in recent years, in the last probably 10 to 20 years, we've started really researching it and understanding it and taking a look at the effects of these sports to the brain, and it's crazy. I mean, it will blow your mind, especially when talking about Chris Benoit. But, it's one that is back in the media right now with, football players, the Miami Dolphins quarterback, Tua. He suffered a really bad concussion this past week, and people are calling for his retirement and saying that he should, because this is like his third one, like real serious one, where he leapt head first on a play, and then he literally goes limp, and his arm, the arms come out, and his arms go like limp as well, and you can tell he's like out. And I think it's a big thing that professional athletes are having to wrestle with. Do I keep my career going for the sake of the game, for money, to provide for my family? When is it time to hang it up? And I think it's a really difficult question.
And that was a question that Chris Benoit had toward the end there.
Yeah.
Was, when do I retire? When do I get out of this?
Right. And so, yeah, this case is, it's just tragic. I mean, it's sad. I'm not going to lie to you.
It's very sad.
This was a family that was destroyed at the hands of the one that they loved, a close family member. So Let's go ahead and just jump into things because there's a lot of ground to cover. We've got to kind of take you back to the beginning so you can really see who Chris was before all these things happened and understand, the man that he was. So let's go back to, the very beginning when he was born. So Christopher Michael Benoit was born May 21st, 1967 in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, to Michael and Margaret Benoit, and he had one sister named Lori. He grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, and as a kid, classmates described him as soft-spoken, emotional, shy, and just an easygoing dude. He was sensitive and kind, which often made him a target for jokes in school. By age 12, he began idolizing wrestlers he'd watch in Edmonton. He begged his parents to take him to wrestling matches all the time, and he fell in love with wrestlers like Tom Billington or Dynamite Kid, who was ahead of his time. Chris was very drawn to his sarcastic sense of humor and his intensity in the ring. He also loved seeing him in the ring with fellow wrestler Bret Hart. From then on, Chris became incredibly dedicated to the intense training required to become a pro wrestler, and even trained side by side with one of his idols, Bret Hart, in what was known as the Hart Family Dungeon, which was a gym and wrestling school in the Hart family mansion. Chris would later credit the family patriarch, Stu Hart, for teaching him everything he needed to know about pro wrestling. Although other sources, including Chris's father, claim that Chris was mostly trained by men who worked for Stu. Either way, Chris would later become somewhat of an honorary family member in the Hart family, and they quickly noticed how he would go above and beyond the goals they set for him. His work ethic was bar none. He would even chastise other wrestlers for worrying too much about protecting their bodies. For Chris, it was showmanship above anything else. And from early on, Chris always tried to match the wrestling styles of his hero, Dynamite Kid. High risk and big muscles, baby. After years of continuous training and bodybuilding throughout high school, Chris officially began his career in 1985 when he was 18 years old. He was promoted by Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling in Alberta, and he would take a bus from Edmonton to Calgary every Friday after school and then train the entire weekend. So already showing mad dedication to wrestling, which, I'm sure that's what's required in order to really make it and become a successful, at least, professional wrestler, right?
A lot of hard work.
He was originally billed as Dynamite Chris Benoit. His debut was a tag team match on November 22nd, 1985 in Calgary, Alberta. He teamed up with the remarkable Rick Patterson, and he actually went on to win several international tag team and British Commonwealth titles. By the end of 1989, Stampede Wrestling shut down, but Chris had already gained a cult following by then. The wrestler Dynamite Kid, or Tom Billington, who was also his idol, had also gifted him a pair of his old wrestling boots. So his dreams were really starting to come true. Chris soon moved over to New Japan Pro Wrestling, and he spent another year doing intense training in their dojo. He also worked as an errand boy, swept floors, and cleaned toilets before making his own debut as the Pegasus Kid, wearing a mask for the first time. And he quickly became a fan favorite, wrestling against big names in the league like Jushin Liger, the Black Tiger, and El Samurai. And it was around this time that he became close friends with his wrestling peer, Eddie Guerrero. It was pretty rare for Chris to make friends in the industry because he was so dedicated to his craft. He's from people that would, cross paths with him in the gym. It sounded like he really kind of kept to himself. He's not a big social, butterfly. He just was so focused
on,
let
me train and let me wrestle. That's it.
Which some saw him as rude, because he mostly socialized with other wrestlers if he had to, but with Eddie and Dean Malenko, they called themselves the Three Amigos, and they would follow each other's careers across the world for years to come. Throughout his career, he continued the iconic wrestling moves that inspired him the most from his early years, and he quickly became known for moves like the diving headbutt and for suplexing extremely large wrestlers. We actually have a couple clips to show you what those moves look like.
So here's the diving headbutt.
Can't be good for the head there.
No.
Oh.
So he would just do this all the time.
So jumping off there, 15 feet at least.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Leading with the head and falling onto another wrestler. It's pretty intense. And I think some would argue, is he actually hitting them,
Right. Of course. I mean, they're trying to be safe about these. You're not trying to break your skull open.
Because you would think that every time he'd do it, he'd be bust his head open. Right?
Yeah. No, it's all acrobatics and show. I mean, you're still throwing your body down. You know, it's not the safest thing to do, but no, it is showmanship that they're doing as well. It's not just like they're ramming their skull into each other.
Yeah, it looks like they're kind of leading with the body first. So they're letting their like torso hit the mat first before their head kind of like pops off of the. And
that's a lot of the trick to wrestling, right? Yeah. You want to absorb the blow in a safer way than you normally would, or it's how you would think that they are doing it when you watch it. All right, and then here's the suplex moves he would do with some pretty big dudes.
This matchup to determine the number one contender to be Kurt Angle at the Royal Rumble for the WWE title. This is a mistake. Oh my God, there is no way. Do it! And German suplex, 500 pounds of the Big Show driven to the mat.
So obviously, I mean, you could tell he's kind of assisting the throw, yeah. But that was his style. Big moves.
Big moves.
This episode of Lights Out is brought to you by Miracle Made. And you know what? Your nighttime bedroom temperature has a huge impact on how you sleep. And I know that's true for me. I cannot sleep when it is too hot. I'm a big baby when it comes to that. I need to sleep in the cold. I'd rather sleep in freezing temperature rooms than sleep in the heat. So if you wake up too hot, I love them. I sleep in them every single night. Traditional bed sheets too, they can harbor disgusting bacteria, more bacteria than a toilet seat, which is just, come on. Are you kidding me? Disgusting. So thankfully, these sheets are infused with silver, like I said before, that prevent up to 99.7% of bacterial growth, leaving them to stay cleaner and fresh 3 times longer than other bed sheets. No more gross odors, and also just less laundry, which is a win-win for me. They're also, on top of all this, super comfortable. Miracle Made sheets are luxuriously comfortable, you might say, without that high price tag of other luxury brands. They are designed for your skin in mind, so stop sleeping on bacteria. Come on, guys. Go to trymiracle.com/lightsout to try Miracle Made sheets today. And you know what? If you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our specific promo code LIGHTSOUT at checkout, you will get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Come on. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. So upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/lightsout and use the code LIGHTSOUT to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40%. Again, that's trymiracle.com/lightsout to treat yourself.
Then in 1990, he won his first major championship, the IWGP Junior Heavyweight Championship. He later lost the title, though, in his mask reinventing himself as Wild Pegasus. He then went on to win the Super J Cup tournament in 1994, putting him on the radar as one of the strongest junior heavyweights in the world. As his career took off, Chris eventually left New Japan to compete in Australia and Lucha Libre Wrestling in Mexico, and he won several regional championships and also performed in the World Championship Wrestling, WCW, starting in June 1992, and he would soon make a name for himself around the world. As his career began taking off, Chris married a Canadian woman named Martina, and together they would have 2 children, a son named David, born 1993, and a daughter named Megan, who was born in 1997. Chris and Martina would keep most of their relationship relatively private over the years. His wrestling career took a turn when he began working in the Extreme Championship Wrestling, or the ECW, in between his tours in Japan. He ended up wrestling Terry Brunk, aka Sabu, on November 5th, 1994 in Philadelphia. And in the first few moments of the match, Chris gave Sabu a back body drop, expecting Sabu to land face first, but Sabu rotated himself mid-air, attempting to land on his back. Instead, he landed almost entirely on top of his head. And there's a clip of that we'll show you. So as you just saw, Sabu landed on his neck clearly and is in pain. He's clutching his neck and he rolls out of the ring. And so they ended the match early because at first they thought that he might have actually broken his neck. Chris returned to the locker room and broke down crying because he was thinking that he might have just paralyzed a fellow wrestler. After Sabu was looked over by medical staff, it was discovered that he had injured his spinal cord, resulting in nerve damage. But luckily, Sabu returned to the ring 2 weeks later, which I'm like, damn, go back into the ring 2 weeks later.
Right. And this does give you a little bit of a glimpse into Chris as well, that, you know, these are burly men, they're manly men, and he's going into the locker room crying, thinking that he just seriously hurt a fellow wrestler. So that you get a little glimpse of who Chris is at this point in his career.
At this point in his career, Chris was given a new nickname. Paul Heyman, the head booker of ECW, came up with the Crippler, which later became the Canadian Crippler Chris Benoit by 1995, which is kind of fucked up, honestly.
Terrible. And also this was right, this was basically right after this incident.
So fucking insensitive.
Yeah.
You almost actually, you know, paralyze this guy.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, that's a great nickname for him. Crippler. Chris later signed with WCW in late 1995, and he started out in the Cruiserweight division. As he impressed the higher-ups early on, he quickly became a member of the reformed Four Horsemen in 1995. The other three horsemen were Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Brian Pillman, but Pillman abruptly left the WCW after outing Kevin Sullivan during a match as the Booker, a wrestling term that's equivalent of a director.
So you might not think that that's a big deal, but it is because of this thing called kayfabe. Are you familiar with kayfabe at all? It's basically where you have to just pretend everything is real. And as we know, entertainment wrestling is not real, but we'll get into this. So kayfabe is the presentation of pro wrestling as unscripted, legitimate, and or quote unquote real. And this was maintained for decades up until about the 1980s and 1990s. One specific incident confirmed to many fans that kayfabe had been broken. This was when Hacksaw Jim Duggan and his mortal enemy, the Iron Sheik, were arrested for possession of marijuana in the mid-80s. People were shocked to see guys who were supposed to be quote-unquote mortal enemies in the ring, right? They were hanging out and being friends, getting marijuana. So in the same vein, Brian Pillman left the WCW after vocally outing Kevin Sullivan as a booker during a match. This is breaking kayfabe.
How'd they ever think that that was going to like last anyways?
Yeah. I have heard stories where certain, like, if there was like a heel and a good guy and they saw each other in a bar randomly when they were not quote unquote in character, they would have to maintain that character and like get in a fight in front of the general public to be like, yeah, we actually hate each other.
To keep it going. I wonder if that was like written into their contracts.
It
had to have been like, you have to keep this up.
Yep.
In the ring, outside the ring.
Yeah. So now
see each other at Walmart.
Yeah.
You know, gotta
start throwing bicycles
smack
at
down
each other
in the aisle.
Yeah. So, and I guess that was the allure of it too, especially for fans, that you almost have this theater performance that is extending into real life. That was the attraction.
Well, and I feel like a lot of these wrestling leagues also attract a lot of younger viewers. I know, like for me personally, I was a young teen when I started watching WWE, and I thought it was real.
Same, yeah.
For
when
a
I was
long
a kid,
time.
I remember, Jonathan Morricone, my old friend, he had WWE, like the N64 game, and that's what first got me into it. I thought it was real too. You know, you're going in we're also kids, so of course we want to think it's more real than that. But I mean, they wanted to maintain that though.
They present it as real. It's not like they're like, welcome to the show. They don't make it, they make it seem like it's all legit.
Yeah. And that's the whole point where you get those backstage interviews, the whole thing where they're coming out and like yelling at each other outside of the ring, you know. So that was the whole idea, is that it's beyond the ring. But obviously people caught on to this, and it's just a show. It's good theater, right?
It's good theater.
After incidents like this, pro wrestling struggled to maintain that appearance that it was quote unquote real, and the consistency of kayfabe struggled. Today in pro wrestling, kayfabe doesn't really exist. maybe to some degree it does, but decades ago, wrestlers would stay in character in and out of the ring, like I said, trying to convince the world that these narratives were real.
How exhausting for them.
I know, right?
They have to keep this shit up all the time, other than in their home. What if what if they had to keep it up with their like wife or partner?
God, that would be so exhausting. You're just role playing your entire life.
You're in costume. No matter what you're doing.
It would be ridiculous. So in the mid-90s, they introduced Chris as a gruff, no-nonsense heel, similar to his ECW persona, the Crippler. For those who don't know the lingo, a heel is basically the villain or the bad guy in pro wrestling. At first, Kevin and Chris feuded and had 2 major confrontations during pay-per-views, but Kevin wanted the feud to escalate. So Kevin, quote-unquote, booked a feud with Chris. Booking is basically like, you're going to the higher-ups and being like, can we write this narrative into pro wrestling? So Kevin booked this feud with Chris, where Chris would have an affair with Kevin's real wife and fellow pro wrestler, Nancy. She was called Woman at the time.
How come she doesn't get a creative name?
I know,
like, what is
Woman.
This?
Yeah, right.
Jesus.
And so she unfortunately is one of the victims in this story. So we're going to go a little bit into who Nancy was. She was born Nancy Elizabeth Tuffaloni, and she was born on May 17th, 1964 in Boston, Massachusetts. After moving to Florida with her family, Nancy began working as a model and selling event programs at local wrestling shows. As a big fan of wrestling, she made her in-ring debut under the name Fallen Angel in 1984, and she also met fellow wrestler and future husband Kevin Sullivan during a photo shoot. So if you remember, Kevin is the one that is booking the duel with Chris. She later joined this kayfabe Satanist gimmick wrestling group, which, I mean, it was mostly just for show. I think they just slapped the Satanist.
Well, it's the Satanic Panic time period.
Yeah, it's true.
So
it's like, popular.
It's going to get people's attention, right?
Yep. And this was around the time she divorced her first husband, Jim Dowse, her high school sweetheart. She also became Kevin's valet, which you don't know what a valet is. It's a wrestling term for a person who accompanies another wrestler into the ring.
Really original terms they've got going on
Yeah,
here.
I know, right?
These
And
pictures are just iconic.
Aren't they hilarious? The old wrestler
God.
costumes, it's like they went to a costume store and picked out.
Yeah, it's like they went to
some cheap
Spirit
gear.
Halloween
Yeah.
and picked up the makeup kit.
Yep. So Nancy and Kevin then married in 1985, and they worked in the WCW for a time before wrestling independently for a few years. But now, since Kevin booked an affair, Chris and Nancy began spending time together outside of the ring to make the affair look real. If you remember kayfabe, this is
Got to keep it going.
Yeah, this is the whole
outside
idea.
of work too.
So they had reportedly met before the booked affair, possibly in the EDW. But as the affair was written into the wrestling narrative, they spent far more time together. They were even photographed traveling together, holding hands, and sharing hotel rooms. At first, Chris expressed some concern about this storyline since he was still married to Martina, if you remember. Reportedly, his marriage was falling apart at home while Martina was pregnant with their daughter at this time. Martina would later describe Chris as one of the most caring people she had ever met. She would later defend his character after everything that happened. She emphasized that he had a secret sensitivity about him that he hid from the world. Unfortunately, Chris's dedication to pro wrestling and escalating drug and steroid abuse kind of behind the scenes would tear this marriage apart. Martina felt like when he used steroids, he would become a different person. He became paranoid and accusatory. He even once threw a ceramic plate at her during a fight. And we will get more into the use of anabolic steroids a bit later, but Martina would end up leaving him for her own safety and the safety of their children. So, like I said, we'll dive into the drug use a bit later, but just keep this in mind. This is what's going on kind of behind the scenes. Meanwhile, off screen, Kevin and Nancy's marriage was also falling apart. Nancy's sister Sandra claimed that their relationship was, quote, at best, volatile. Allegedly, Kevin was also abusive at times, and Sandra claimed that one of their fights once left Nancy with a black eye. Kevin has since refuted those allegations and even claimed that Nancy once stabbed him during one of their fights and ended up in a Florida jail for 3 days. According to him, he later bailed her out and declined to press charges. So a lot of relationship turmoil behind the scenes here. In later years, police would uncover Nancy's record of abuse in her journals at the hands of Kevin Sullivan. So as things worsened, Nancy's affair with Chris was no longer fictional. This wasn't just a kayfabe wrestling narrative. The more time they spent together off-screen, the more it developed into a real-life affair. Chris and Kevin's relationship also worsened in front of and behind the camera. Today, it's now joked that Kevin Sullivan, quote, booked his own divorce because he's the one that set up Chris and Nancy in the first place. And Kevin and Nancy soon did divorce in 1997. Around the same time, Chris also divorced Martina. So in later years, Chris said that Kevin always kept things professional despite the drama behind the scenes. Kevin scheduled his last retirement match with Chris, lost, and then spent his wrestling career out of the ring, mostly on booking. As for Nancy, she appeared as Woman one last time on May 26, 1997. She accompanied Chris to the ring one last time, and after that, no explanation was given for what happened to her character, and she was just never mentioned again on WCW programming, which is a bit odd. Meanwhile, Chris and Nancy became engaged soon after their respective divorces. So a lot going on there. Recap, I guess, if you need it. Nancy was with Kevin. Chris was with Martina. Kevin booked the affair with Chris and Nancy, which led to a real life affair, which dissolved both of those marriages for a multitude of reasons. And now Chris and Nancy are together.
Do you think he had any idea that this was going to happen?
Kevin?
Yeah.
Because I don't think so.
Just kind of unfolded the way that it did,
Or
was he
maybe
looking
he
for an
knew,
out, maybe,
yeah,
and like
that's a
this
good
what gave
point.
him a good excuse to leave? I don't know.
That's a good point.
I mean, purely speculation, but I don't know. It's
I could see
really
that.
weird how it all unfolds, and
Yeah, no, I could see that. So even though Chris's career seemed to have an unlimited amount of potential at this point in the pro wrestling scene, the higher-ups never seemed to give him the break he was looking for. No matter how good he was, he could only get so far because, as we know in pro wrestling, it's not like you win.
it's not like skill based.
Yeah,
right?
like
necessarily.
It's like you work really hard, you make a big name for yourself, you play your character to the best that you can, and then the higher ups write in your wins. I hope nobody gets mad at me for saying that, but that's just how it goes in entertainment wrestling. So plus, Kevin Sullivan eventually took over the booker role for the WCW in early 2000s. So the three amigos wanted to leave, especially since Chris thought Kevin might retaliate for what happened with Nancy. But as a sign of good faith, Kevin actually booked Chris to win his first World Heavyweight Championship at a sold-out pay-per-view match. It's a pretty strong gesture coming from Kevin, right?
Yeah.
Even still, Chris wanted out of the WCW, and he, along with Eddie Guerrero and the rest, left the WCW together on the day after that match. Chris returned the title belt and later found his place in the WWF, which was later the WWE.
Because WWF is World Wrestling
Federation.
Federation,
Yeah.
that's right. And then it went to entertainment.
Yep.
So like, well, cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, right.
People know it's not real.
Yep. And so, thankfully, the WCW officially granted Chris's unconditional release from that league.
So meanwhile, during the transition to the WWF, Nancy was at home pregnant with their first child, and Daniel Christopher Benoit was born February 25th, 2000. Beautiful young boy here.
Yeah.
I mean, just...
He looks a lot like
He
his dad,
does.
too.
He does. Looks a lot like Chris. Chris really seemed to be on top of the world at this point, at least on paper, and he just had another child, and his career was getting a boost from Vince McMahon over at WWF, and he debuted in the wrestling stable called the Radicals, which later became a heel faction. Soon enough, he was also headlining major pay-per-view matches, which I assume probably a lot more money on the line in the pay-per-view matches.
Definitely.
From all the people paying. I never was able to get the pay-per-view matches.
No, I mean, I
unfortunately.
didn't have the money for it, but this was the era of pay-per-view.
WrestleMania,
Yep.
But one pay-per-view match included a world title match against The Rock. We all know Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson,
One of the biggest names.
now one of the biggest movie stars ever at this point.
Yep.
Even though all of his movies are kind of terrible,
same,
honestly.
yeah. I think he's taking kind of not a step back, but I think they're trying to readjust his career a little bit just because his movies haven't been doing well lately.
Yeah, makes sense for why he started a men's grooming line.
Yeah.
Have you seen that yet at Target?
Yeah, I have. He's like, the most important thing to do is face toner.
That's right, baby.
Yeah. His tequila's decent.
Is it? I
Yeah.
haven't tried his tequila yet.
Terramana. It's all right. I mean,
Doesn't like every famous person have a tequila at this point?
I think that's like when you need a little bit of retirement money, you just get a tequila
Start
line.
a tequila line.
Yeah.
Chris would end up making hundreds of thousands of dollars every year between his contract payments and merchandise, which the WWE, WWF is really good at merchandising and licensing. I mean,
do you remember those, like, they were like about yay big? They were like the squishy wrestler dolls, basically, action figures.
Yeah, I vaguely do. Yeah,
like the muscles that you could like squeeze,
manipulate.
Yeah, and then you could buy the rings and stuff too.
Yep. Definitely remember all the like smaller action figures as well.
Yeah,
God, I feel like you would see that stuff everywhere.
Toys R Us, baby.
They had a whole WWE freaking row
Yeah.
of merchandise.
Yeah.
Near the end of that year, Chris and Nancy finally married on November 23rd, 2000. And at the time, Nancy was retired and was at home caring for their son, Daniel. She also managed Chris's career from their home in Atlanta. During a four-way match, Chris ended up injuring his neck, but reportedly continued wrestling. So there's definitely this pressure, and some of it may be just Chris putting it on himself to stay relevant and stay on top. That, you know, when you sustain an injury, you know, they don't take time to actually heal that properly.
Yeah.
And they just got to get back in there, you know, wear a neck brace for a week and then you get right back in the ring.
Right.
So, you know, you can only imagine the long-term damage that's probably being caused due to these injuries.
Yeah.
And during another match, the WWF title at King of the Ring 2001, he injured it even further during a suplex move. And after this, he had to sit out for nearly a year while he recovered from a 3-hour neck operation. But his popularity still grew, and on his return, he was placed on the Raw roster, and he returned as a heel or villain. Over the years, he would go on to feud with big-name wrestlers like Stone Cold Steve Austin and John Cena. He even feuded with Gotta say, John Cena's definitely was one of my faves.
Yeah, he was huge.
He even had a little rap career
he did,
for a bit.
You can't see me. My time is now.
Iconic, man.
Yeah.
But Chris even feuded with his great friend, Eddie Guerrero. And on March 14, 2004, at Madison Square Garden, baby, in New York City, Chris reached a career all-time high when he participated in WrestleMania 20. And in front of a sold-out crowd, Chris won the heavyweight title for the first and last time in his career. And as the big celebration began, Eddie Guerrero went to join him in the ring, and they hugged each other in celebration. Earlier that night, Eddie had also won his championship match for the SmackDown brand, and they were both just at the absolute height of their careers, and they had both become household names in the pro wrestling scene. And it really seemed like their hard work after all these years had finally paid off. On top of this, Eddie had struggled with substance abuse issues that almost cost him his life. 3 years earlier, he was arrested for driving under the influence and temporarily lost his job with the WWE. But after his wife threatened to leave him, he recovered in rehab, and he later built his wrestling career back from the ground up. So the celebration was much bigger than just winning the match. You know, he's working on sobriety, just trying to get his life in order. So it was just a huge night for them. Nancy and Daniel also joined Chris on stage off the air, and it seemed like a fairy tale celebration for them. But behind the scenes, Chris and Nancy struggled in their marriage. Unknown to the public, Nancy had filed for divorce less than a year before WrestleMania 20 on May 12, 2003. She alleged cruel treatment and claimed their marriage was irrevocably broken. On May 15th, she also filed for a temporary protective order against Chris, which would prevent him from contacting her and Daniel. Chris would also be ordered to pay $5,000 in child support, and in return, Chris was willing to fight for full custody of Daniel. According to Nancy, Chris would fly into a rage for no reason, resulting in destroyed furniture in their home. Nancy also informed her lawyer of another incident years earlier. Back in 1998, Chris and Nancy had an argument that ended with Chris leaving their house. Hours later, police found him drunk in his car, parked in front of another house. He told police he used to live there with his first wife, and it was at that moment that they arrested him and charged him with a DUI. According to others close to Nancy and Chris, they had several periods of separation throughout the years, especially in 2001 when Chris was recovering from neck surgery and not working. Nancy claimed that under pressure, Chris continued to use anabolic steroids for muscle growth during this recovery period. Chris had been worried about losing muscle mass while not working. And really, a big thing for these guys is looks. The looks is part of the gig.
You have to look superhuman.
Absolutely. And so reportedly, the couple also fought over Chris's use of pain medication during this time. So he's got the anabolic steroids going as well as pain medication. In the divorce suit, Nancy claimed that she feared for her and Daniel's safety. She even cited a time when she took Daniel from their home during one of Chris's fits of rage. Allegedly, he had threatened to hit her. The judge granted Nancy's protective order, and over the next couple of months, Chris and Nancy separated. But in a later hearing regarding a long-term protective order, Chris and Nancy showed up to the court holding hands. They told their lawyers that they had reconciled their marriage. Nancy later dropped the suit on August 19, 2003, and the protective order was lifted. They also promised the court they would attend professional counseling, but we're not really sure if that ever happened. According to Nancy's friend Julie, wife of pro wrestler Dean Malenko, she took on the role of Nancy's therapist for the time being. And some believe Chris's good friend Eddie also acted as his quote-unquote therapist.
So unfortunately, on November 13th, 2005, Eddie's nephew and fellow wrestler Chavo Guerrero Jr. got a call from the front desk of the Marriott Hotel City Center in Minneapolis. This was only a few hours before he was supposed to wrestle at a SmackDown vs. Raw taping. Eddie had missed his wake-up call and wasn't answering the hotel door. Chavo and hotel security then entered the hotel by cutting the lock, and Chavo found Eddie on the bathroom floor holding a toothbrush. He had labored breaths, but he was still alive at this time. When emergency services arrived to the scene, Eddie was pronounced dead. He was only 38 years old, and his official cause of death was acute heart failure due to underlying cardiovascular disease. Although Eddie was clean at the time, past steroid use, prescription drugs, and alcohol abuse were listed as contributing factors.
Which isn't it a known thing? Anabolic steroids are really hard on the heart.
Yes,
that is true.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll get into symptoms a bit later. But Chavo later called Chris to tell him the bad news, and Chavo recalled hearing a guttural wailing on the other end. Those who were close to Chris said he was never the same after Eddie's death.
Because Eddie's like a brother to him.
Yes, they were introduced early on in their wrestling career. They knew each other and they won their titles at the same time. It was kind of just this. They were seen as like the bros, and that's also considering how Chris wasn't really super friendly with a lot of his other wrestling mates, but him and Eddie were always close through the years. So he took this very hard. And it was seen in the tribute episode that aired the night after Eddie's death, because Chris was just devastated, even on camera. He broke down during his video testimonial, and many saw this as completely out of character because, on screen, as I was saying, pro wrestlers, they love maintaining this masculine, indestructible, superhuman-like character. But in hindsight, unfortunately, many saw this as the moment Chris began breaking down mentally. Maybe this was where it all started to fall apart, some suggest. In the aftermath, Chris fell into a very deep depression. For months, he shut down and would rarely talk to loved ones. He began writing letters to Eddie in his journal as a form of therapy, and these letters were later publicized, and many saw this as evidence of Chris becoming much more mentally unstable as time passed. It was filled with writings on paranoia and nightmares of loved ones dying, and friends and family also witnessed Chris just falling apart in the weeks and months that followed Eddie's death. Fellow wrestler Chris Jericho recalled Chris hugging him while sobbing and soaking his shirt the day after Eddie's funeral. Chavo said it seemed like Chris had been grieving so hard, it seemed like he had lost a spouse.
I think that's a really good way to explain it.
Right.
Just absolutely devastated.
Yeah. Then Chris got straight back to work because that's who he is, very dedicated to his craft. He went on to defeat Triple H in a tribute match for Eddie, and then Chris, Triple H, and Dean Malenko all assembled in the ring and pointed to the sky in a salute to Eddie. Despite the loss of his friend and declining mental health, Chris kept working over the next several months, but by May 2006, he decided to take a break and return home for several months, probably much needed. That December, Nancy had back and neck fusion surgery, and during her recovery, Chris helped out around the house and took care of the kids. He also took some time for himself to recover from a few minor work-related injuries like a nagging shoulder injury, and he also underwent a procedure to repair a hernia. A rumor had also spread that Chris was taking this time off work to address his steroid and prescription drug use. Remember, this is a rumor. We don't actually know. But just before Chris took some time off, the WWE actually implemented a wellness policy on February 27, 2006. This was in direct response to the death of Eddie Guerrero.
Crazy it took this much time,
right,
for them to have a wellness policy.
2006.
That's crazy. Which I think says a lot about the people that started these organizations, that they never once thought about, the actually caring about these athletes that are generating millions and millions of dollars for them.
And I wonder if Eddie, if he wasn't so high profile, if they would have even done this at all.
True.
Right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
So the policy had two programs. The Talent Wellness Program was a drug, cardiovascular, and alcohol screening program that tested for the use of steroids and prescribed medications, along with alcohol, obviously. The other checked upon just their overall well-being, which is kind of vague, but many popular wrestlers would go on to fail the drug tests throughout the years, and when a wrestler failed the testing for the first time, they were suspended for 30 days. But certain growth hormones and prescribed medications couldn't be detected by these tests, so keep that in mind as well. Still, the rumor that Chris was taking time off because of a suspension or trying to get clean has never been substantiated. During his sabbatical, his marriage with Nancy did grow stronger during this time. Chris also told close friends he felt much better after taking this time off, but something was still clearly different about him. Allegedly, he became more paranoid, talking to friends and family about someone or something that was stalking him and his family. He also began taking side streets and different routes to get where he needed to go, thinking that he was being followed. He would also change cars and keep a watchful eye on the home security system. Eventually, he told his son Daniel that he could no longer play outside. Chris also struggled with finding Daniel what he considered a safe school to attend. He also requested that Nancy not leave the house alone anytime after 6 p.m. So at some point, Chris spoke to another pro wrestler who had been threatened with kidnapping, and this scared Chris even more. It got to the point that Chris moved his family out of the Peachtree City area of Georgia and 20 miles east to Fayetteville. The new house was a nearly $1 million gated mansion in a suburb with low crime rates. He then got 2 German Shepherds, one named Carney and the other High Spot, to act as his guard dogs.
So what do you think is going on here? Because this is kind of seemingly coming out of nowhere.
Yeah, I wonder if, it could be a mixture of things. It could be like, wow, I am a household name, so maybe I need to watch out for myself. At the same point, is this like something with like drug use kind of getting to him, changing his brain a little bit, giving him that paranoia? I know a lot of drugs have paranoia as a side effect. What do you think's going on?
I think what you said probably explains it, but again, we just don't know, because again, he's on top of the world. He's still one of the biggest names in wrestling, so it could be that. But why move, and all of a sudden, just, when you're not even active too, you know what I mean?
Right.
And maybe he just took it as an opportunity. He's like, well, now I have the time to do it. So might as well move my family. And maybe there's some other reasons, maybe financial reasons that we don't know about, but it definitely seems like there's a growing paranoia going on there.
Definitely.
Or is he, he's talking to other pro wrestlers who is threatened with kidnapping. Is something he reading or learning about? As we'll get into a little bit later, when talking about his spirituality a little bit.
Yeah.
Is he starting to kind of, become a little bit delusional about things, about reality? And yeah, it's really hard to say. I feel like there's something more there that we're missing that's going on at this period.
Yeah.
Something happened, or something's going on internally with him.
For sure.
That just nobody knows about, but
yeah,
kind of odd. This episode is sponsored by one of my favorite services, HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. I love HelloFresh and I love to eat. Probably can tell by looking at me that I never miss a meal, because HelloFresh has boxes coming to my house on a weekly basis with all the meals that I need for my weekly dinners. And it has saved me so much time and money, honestly, because in the past I'd have to write up a whole grocery list, then figure out when I'm going to find time to go to the grocery store. And then I feel like every time you go to the grocery store these days, your jaw drops when you're at the cash register, because you're like, I bought 5 items and it's $100.
It was like popcorn,
yeah,
and a carrot,
exactly,
$70.
You're like, what is going on here? And that's why HelloFresh is really changing the game, because they're giving you fresh ingredients. We're talking from the farm to your front door. I've never had a box of rotten produce, and I've had plenty of rotten produce from the grocery store. Imagine that. But the best thing about it is the convenience. Through the HelloFresh app, I can set all my meals for weeks and weeks in advance and then just forget about it. And HelloFresh is always on time, and it's got all of the pre-portioned ingredients I need for the meals that I picked out all right there. You just throw it in your fridge, and then I get to go to work, come home, and it's easy peasy to get a delicious meal on the table for my family. I'm talking like 30 minutes. The cleanup's a breeze. I can't speak highly enough of HelloFresh. I tell everybody about it because I absolutely love it. And it just takes the thinking out of having to plan your meals. And, you're eating good quality food. And a lot of these recipes are low in calories, high in protein. I mean, they have a different recipes for everybody, whether you're a meat lover or you're a veggie lover or anywhere in between. They've got recipes that are going to fit your family's lifestyle. I also love the customization they give you. You can easily customize your meals with protein or veggie swaps, and they have a HelloFresh Market, which is a whole game changer because they've got breakfast now, they've got snacks, they've got desserts. I love their fall desserts. They're always so good. Honestly, too good that I have to hold myself back from eating too many apple crumbles because it's just delicious. I love those fall sweets. And right now, HelloFresh has a special offer just for our listeners. You can get free breakfast for life if you go to HelloFresh.com/freelightsout. 1 breakfast item per box while your subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life just by going to HelloFresh.com/freelightsout.
And after this, Chris's position in pro wrestling changed. And instead of, he had already reached his height. So now they kind of shifted him into helping the newer guys reach stardom. At this point, he was seen as kind of one of the older guys. In June of 2007, Chris was drafted to the ECW, which was the least popular brand of wrestling within the WWE. So what's going on behind the scenes? Is this because he's kind of deteriorating, that he can't perform as well anymore, so they're shifting him down to this worse league? I'm not sure, but it's at least worth noting that something's going on here. But, he was 40 years old here, so maybe they just thought, hey, he's getting up there. It's time to kind of shift him maybe towards retirement a little bit. And, a newer, younger generation of wrestlers were stepping into the ring at this time. The idea was that Chris was the veteran pro, and narratively, he would then coach all these new guys in the ECW. So they would go on to wrestle for SmackDown or Raw, which were the 2 big ones. Chris ended up wrestling his final match on June 19th, 2007 on an episode of ECW. He won and was scheduled to go on to compete for the ECW World Championship on June 24th. But when that match came around, Chris would miss the weekend shows, which was completely out of character. It was later revealed by a WWE executive that Chris was booked to win the ECW World Championship, but Chris, unfortunately, would never make it to the show. On June 25th, 2007, the day after the championship match, Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel were all discovered dead in their home. Investigators then had to piece together what had happened, and to this day, the days June 22nd to June 25th, 2007 are still shrouded in mystery. No one knows exactly why things happened the way they did, but we're going to do our best to try and break things down for you.
So let's talk about the timeline here for a minute. So on the 19th, Chris had flown home after his last match, and he followed his usual routine, which was working out, tanning. He then slept in and ran some errands, nothing out of the ordinary. On June 22nd, Chris took his son Daniel to a horse riding camp over at the next door neighbor's house, Holly Schrafer's. Later that day, he drove 40 miles to visit his primary care physician, Dr. Phil Aston, and he often visited him for routine checkups every few months. He also used these visits to fill up all of his prescriptions. During this appointment, Dr. Aston recalled that Chris asked him some odd questions about Nancy. He claimed she was more moody than usual and asked if it could be possible that she was starting early onset menopause. Dr. Aston also happened to be Nancy's primary care physician. He told Chris it probably wasn't the case, but he would look into it. Investigators later asked Dr. Aston what Chris's demeanor was like that day. He said he showed no signs of rage or aggression, but he did complain of increased feelings of depression. So he prescribed him the antidepressant Zoloft. And as many of us know, antidepressants often take several weeks for the effects to kick in. It's not an instant thing. The doctors also mentioned that Chris even signed autographs and took pictures with the patients and staff in the waiting room. After leaving the doctor's office, he called his good friend Bob Holly. In the conversation, Bob asked how Chris and Nancy's marriage was going, and Chris responded that Nancy was acting quote-unquote like Hitler, but he also said they were trying to work things out. On this particular call, Bob also mentioned he was in Atlanta to meet with his lawyer. Chris asked if he wanted to come to his house about a half hour away, but Bob declined. He figured Chris should spend time off with his family. Bob would regret not going to the house, thinking things might have ended differently. After that call, Chris met up with another industry friend, Ray Rawls, aka Rick Michaels, and he had been hired 3 years earlier by the WWE as an outfit tailor. But he was fired in late 2005 when he was caught exposing himself to a minor, and he later admitted his guilt in court. But Chris stayed friends with him, and he still worked as Chris's personal tailor for his wrestling outfits along with other big-name wrestlers at the time. That afternoon, Chris met up with Ray and paid him for his tailor work. He then drove home and called his travel partner, Chavo Guerrero, Eddie's nephew, as they had grown very close after Eddie's death. Chris also made a phone call to Nancy, who was out shopping for food at the local supermarket, as they were planning to have a cookout that night. He made another call to a local car dealership because he was considering selling one of his vehicles. He then made one more call to a pool service company so that they could get the pool in order before the cookout. That evening, the pool service guy showed up and witnessed Chris grilling outside with Daniel. The whole day seemed fairly average, but
that's what I was going to say, right? It just seems like normal appointments, normal conversations.
It does, yeah. Seems like all the normal things you do every week.
Right.
But that evening, things got strange. It's not clear exactly what happened inside of the Benoit household. At 9:25 p.m., an outgoing phone call from the house requested the number of the Fayetteville Police Department, and it's unclear who was calling. Unfortunately, the number that was given was an obsolete non-emergency number. Either way, there was no attempt to call that number from the home phone. At 9:32, and then 9:33, and then 10 p.m., 3 more outgoing calls were made to their next-door neighbor, Holly Schrafer. The calls were not answered, and no one left a voice message. Again, it's not clear who was using the phone, but many assume it was Nancy. Police later determined that after getting into a fight with 43-year-old Nancy in a TV room on the second floor of the home, Chris bound Nancy's hand and feet. Then he wrapped a coaxial cable around her neck. He then got her on her stomach, pushed his knee into her back, and pulled on the cable, choking her to death. According to police, there was evidence of a struggle. Nancy had tried to fight back. There was also signs of trauma across her body, especially bruising. I believe he was pressing so hard it actually broke her back.
Oh, really?
As well, which is just horrifying. Blood was discovered on her head, which suggested that Chris might have struck her head into the floor after she was bound. Chris then wrapped Nancy's body in a blanket and placed a Holy Bible next to her. After killing Nancy, Chris went to his 7-year-old son Daniel's room, got on his bed, and performed a chokehold on his son until he died. A kitchen knife was later found underneath Daniel's bed, but it was never used in the attack. A toxicology report later revealed that Daniel had been sedated with the prescription drug Xanax. The DA later noted that this was not a drug that would be given to a child under normal circumstances. Investigators also believe that Daniel was unconscious at the time of the attack. Chris had also placed another Bible next to his son's body, which is all very bizarre. I'm going to talk about that more here in a little bit. But the next morning, around 8:30 a.m., Chris made a call to Holly Schrafer. No one picked up, so Chris left a voicemail asking if Daniel was supposed to be at horse camp that day. He told her Daniel wouldn't be able to attend because he was feeling ill. Around 1:57 p.m., Chris made a call to fellow wrestler Michael Parker. Michael had just left a WWE tryout, and he had called Chris earlier asking about office politics. Michael didn't answer when Chris had called, so he left a message. When investigators later listened to this voicemail, Chris could be heard rambling and slurring his words. At around 3 p.m., the neighbor Holly Schrafer called Chris back. They spoke for about 10 minutes, and Chris told Holly that Daniel was coughing up blood from food poisoning. He then expressed how bad he felt since he couldn't take care of him, and he also mentioned that Nancy was suffering from this same illness, but hers wasn't as severe. He then told Holly that he and his family wanted to lay low for a couple of days while they healed from this illness. But the truth was that Chris just didn't want Holly anywhere near his property.
So at around 4 p.m., Chris got on the home computer and made his way to a Wikipedia entry of the Jewish prophet Elijah. Remember, we referenced that he had laid 2 holy Bibles next to the body. So this is kind of the connection there. In the following year, many have tried to understand what Chris was looking for, and Elijah appears both in the Old Testament, New Testament, the Talmud, the Quran, the Book of Mormon, and the texts in the Baha'i faith. His name translates to "My God is Yahweh," and he was from the 9th century BCE and was a miracle worker who lived in the northern kingdom of Israel. So this is going to be just a little bit of a outside story here, but bear with me because it might have some connections to what's going on or what Chris was thinking. But it's not clear exactly what he was looking for in this Wikipedia entry, but many have pointed out that in one story in the Book of Kings in the Hebrew Bible, Prophet Elijah is commanded by God to flee Israel. He was sent east of the Jordan River to be fed by ravens. God then sends him to a widow's home. Elijah asked her for some water and a piece of bread, but the widow claims she does not have enough food for Elijah if she was going to also keep her own son alive as well. So I don't know, I don't want to speculate, but just keep in mind the characters here: Elijah, a widow, a son. We have 3 people, right? Elijah tells her not to worry because God would not allow her flour, oil, or water to run out. Convinced, she feeds Elijah the last of their food. Her flour, oil, and water are eventually restored, but her son still dies. Elijah then prays for God to restore the soul of the young boy, and he is soon resurrected. It's believed this is actually possibly the first instance of someone being raised from the dead ever recorded in biblical scripture. So this might have some connection here. It has been reported that Chris also Google searched the fastest way to break a neck, but this, you'll hear this in other stories, but this has been disputed. There was, I believe it was possibly the prosecutor that said this, but this was later deemed to be not true.
You'd think there'd be a definitive answer on this,
right?
After pulling his search history, but
right. Besides Chris's internet activity, Chris was also in contact with some of his colleagues in the WWE. He had been scheduled to perform that night, June 23rd, at the live event in Beaumont, Texas. Chavo was supposed to take him to the airport that afternoon and also drive him to the arena, because remember, they were travel partners. When Chris and Chavo spoke on the phone that day, Chris said he wouldn't be able to make the show because of Nancy and Daniel's food poisoning. During the call, Chris also told Chavo that he loved him, which seemed kind of out of place for Chavo. So thinking that something was off, Chavo asked Chris if everything was okay. He also urged Chris to make sure he could make it to the pay-per-view on the 24th, which was the ECW World Championship, which he was written in to win that championship. So at some point in the day, Chris changed flights, possibly thinking he could still make it to the house show that day. Or he was just trying to make it look like he was still going to attend just to avoid suspicion. Chris made one last call to Chavo that day. It went to voicemail, so Chris told him he would be on a flight that would arrive in Houston 8 a.m. Sunday morning. He then called an unknown friend and also left a voicemail. But at 6:10 p.m. that evening, Chris made a call to someone in the WWE's talent relations team. He told them he wouldn't be able to attend the night's house show, claiming that Nancy and Daniel were in the hospital vomiting blood. They told him not to worry, but like Chavo, they urged him not to miss the World Championship the next day. The WWE announced that Chris would miss the fight due to an unexpected family emergency. As far as investigators could find, this was the last phone call Chris would ever make. Early that Sunday, June 24th, 2007, Chavo and a wrestling referee, Scott Armstrong, who was also a part of Chris's travel crew, both received strange texts from Chris and Nancy's phone as well. These were sent between 3:51 and 3:58 a.m. The first was from Chris's phone. It read, quote, "My physical address is 130 Green Meadow Lane, Fayetteville, Georgia, 30215. The next read, quote, "The dogs are in the enclosed pool area. Garage side door is open." Investigators believe that immediately after sending these messages, Chris headed into his home gym. He removed the bar from the lat pull-down machine and fashioned the end of the puller cable from the machine into a noose. He then put the noose around his neck, released the weights of the machine, which was roughly 240 pounds, and he took his own life. Unaware of what had just happened, the WWE rearranged Chris's flight for Sunday morning. They tried to contact him throughout the day, but obviously there was no response. They were so concerned that they also called various hospitals in Atlanta, but still nothing. They couldn't find him. So the World Championship match went ahead as scheduled without him. By 11 p.m. that Sunday, nobody could get a hold of Chris. So the next day, the head of talent relations at the WWE, John Laurinaitis, was informed about the strange text messages that Chris had sent, so he requested a welfare check by local police around 12:45. And here's a short clip of that phone call.
Got the message at 3 o'clock in the morning for another wrestler.
Right.
The gate's open, the dogs are in the backyard by the pool, and the back door's open. That was it.
Right. Yeah, because apparently
That's why they're worried about him, because Chris is very, going against Chris, he's very religious.
Right.
Unlike him, he didn't show up for a pay-per-view.
Yeah.
He never made it to the plane. They can't reach his wife, so now nobody's answering the home phone. Nobody's answering the cell phone.
Yeah, and I think as far as, I'm not sure how far away from the road the house is, so I'm not sure if they're able to tell if anybody's there.
Oh,
but
okay.
they, like I said, the gate. It's got a call box. Apparently nobody's answering that.
Okay.
And then the dogs are actually out in the front, so and they're
all right, okay.
yeah, and they're pretty. According to my deputy, they're pretty aggressive as well. So
Okay.
but they're not friendly-ish, but
Odd, he mentions that Chris is a born-again Christian, very spiritual. And I've listened to the extended version of that, and I don't know why he mentions that.
Yeah, that's very odd.
But for whatever reason, he felt compelled to tell the police that Chris was super spiritual.
It's almost as if he knew what was what they were about to find and what was about to happen. That's
right.
Yeah, it is a weird detail to just like throw in
strange?
there. Like, why does that matter in this moment whatsoever?
I don't know. But the Fayetteville County Sheriff's Department returned this man's call a few hours later and informed him that they had found the bodies of the family members inside the home. So considering that, the WWE does not understand what just happened, they only know that the bodies were found in the home.
So they're thinking at first that this could be possibly carbon monoxide poisoning. Could be somebody broke
An intruder,
in and murdered them.
Yeah, they have no idea. It's just they know that they're deceased now. So Vince McMahon gathered up his WWE wrestlers, told them what had happened as far as they knew. The company then canceled the 3-hour live Monday Night Raw show, which was scheduled a few hours later. Coincidentally, this was also supposed to be a memorial for Vince's character, Mr. McMahon, who, quote unquote, died in a limo explosion. He was kind of killing off his character. So it was odd seeing this because some of the attendees were already dressed for a funeral, and there was also a casket there that sat next to the stage. So just a bit eerie. They replaced the broadcast with a tribute to Chris Benoit's life and career. It included match highlights, comments from wrestlers and announcers, and a speech from Vince McMahon. Rumors of the strange text messages began spreading backstage while they're filming this, and some of Chris's colleagues theorized that he might have been responsible for what had happened. And during the last hour of this 3-hour tribute, reports began to surface that Chris, Nancy, and Daniel, they died on different days, because if you remember, Nancy and Daniel died relatively close to each other, but Chris didn't die till a few days later. So this raised even more concerns. And by the following day, Tuesday, June 26th, details of the murder-suicide had come to light. By then, it was clear to police that Chris was the only suspect. And from this point on, the WWE quickly tried to distance itself from Chris Benoit. And this is a slew of what they've done. I mean, the list is even longer than this, but we'll just get into the evidence of them trying to kind of sweep this under the rug very quickly. But
right, and let's not forget to mention the fact that they just did this big 3-hour tribute for Chris Benoit.
Mm-hmm.
Praising him and his accolades, and paying tribute to this man, and then they had to turn around and be like, "Oh shit."
Yep.
Now he's being named in a,
murder,
double
suicide,
homicide, suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're having to backpedal, and because everybody's pissed at this point. I mean, people were like, why are you glorifying a killer?
Exactly.
And so the WWE was like, well, we got to make an extreme, change here really quick, or we risk, the entire WWE's reputation, right? Because people were extremely upset with them doing that, and doing it before they had all the information, which, and they've tried to claim that
they didn't know,
and the authorities didn't provide the information to them. But it's like, don't you think you should at least find out, before you go and do this? Because, they jumped at, they did it like this same day they found out that they were deceased, and that didn't even register to them. Like, well, what happens if Chris was the one that did this?
Right. It's a huge failure. Yeah. And so since then, they've just tried to scrub Chris Benoit clean. News articles, his biography, any tribute comments that were made that day. They pulled the entire tribute episode entirely from the international markets. Several channels also announced the episode was withheld for legal reasons, and they removed Chris's name from his old theme song, Rabid, on the MP3 release of WWE Anthology. Chris was also removed from the 2008 WWE SmackDown vs. Raw video game, along with his signature moves. WWE Classics on Demand also removed any likeness and mentions of Chris and Nancy from their archival footage. They also removed as much as they could of his matches and any other footage he appeared on in any WWE DVD releases after his death. If he ever happened to reappear on any of these matches in the WWE network in the future, there was always a parental advisory shown before the episode. Basically, they just tried to clear any reference of him, any appearance of him, anything with him relating to the WWE, almost as if he never existed. And in this aftermath, it became clear why the WWE was so desperate to pretend that Chris Benoit never existed.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's pretty fucked up they didn't even mention Nancy.
Right, yeah.
Why not at least pay tribute to Nancy?
She was a wrestler, yeah.
And yeah, exactly. Why not, why erase the entire thing? You know what I mean? Like, yes, you're a wrestler, clearly was responsible for this heinous act. But it really is sad that Nancy just seemingly gets swept under the rug, and her whole legacy and career is completely forgotten about.
Yep.
Which is just sad. But as the days passed, more information about the double murder-suicide came to light, and everyone wanted to understand what the hell happened leading up to the 3-day tragedy. The story of Chris Benoit appeared throughout the media in a frenzy. I mean, you can imagine every major mainstream media outlet was covering the story, including MSNBC and Fox News, and the tragedy even made the cover of People magazine. As you know, with mainstream media, they love tragedies, they love to sensationalize a story, and they jumped to the theory that his use of anabolic steroids had caused roid rage, which is the term used. Reportedly, Chris had begun using steroids back in high school, and he continued to use them into his adult professional career. It suggested that he was continuously taking steroids for over 2 decades straight. Before Chris's autopsy results were released, Vince McMahon went on the defense in the media because he's, of course, if you're not familiar with Vince McMahon, he's a big piece of shit.
Yeah, exactly.
He has tons of sexual assault allegations.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got a lot of fucking skeletons.
He's
in
an
his
awful
closet.
person. Yeah.
So of course he's going to get on the media, try to get ahead of it, defend his company, and try to save face as best as he can. So here's a clip from the Today Show right after the tragedy of Vince McMahon.
And yet, almost immediately after, the WWE comes out with a statement saying steroids, quote, were not and could not be related to the cause of death. How could you possibly know that? The toxicology reports are out. They're not going to come back for several weeks. So how can you so definitively say steroids played no part?
Well, we didn't say that. In essence,
That's a quote.
I understand it. Our reaction, by the way, was reacting to the hysteria of the media, which quite naturally they want to get to the bottom of this, as we do.
But Mr. McMahon, the quote is steroids were not and could not be related to the cause of death. That's very specific.
It's very specific, but it was relating to the word rage because of the steroid rage that everyone was using. And obviously this is not an act of rage. It's an act of deliberation when you do something like this over 3 days. It's not an act of rage, be it steroid rage or roid rage, whatever it's called, or any other rage. That's what we're referring to. There's no way, quite frankly, that we and or the media, it's all speculation until the toxicology reports come back. It's all speculation.
But because it's all speculation, I'm guessing, why were you so clear in saying you did not believe that steroids played a part? Steroids found in the house, again. He has a history of violence by his own wife's account. And steroid use can also cause depression and paranoia, and that can also lead people to do crazy things. Doesn't have to be rage alone.
Right. I agree with that. There were a number of prescription medications as well found in the house, and whether or not they had anything to do with this behavior. Who knows? And whether or not there were other aspects involved in his life that had something to do with this behavior. Hopefully we can find out in some way. This has been so devastating as a father and a grandfather and a father figure to all those associated with our brand. This is not what we're about. What we're about is putting smiles on people's faces. This is the opposite of what we do. We're entertainers. We entertain people all over the world, and we put smiles on faces. That's our job description, not something like this to be tainted and smeared with this. It's no different than if you're a postal worker. You still use the post office, but obviously there's been problems there too. There are problems everywhere. There was no indication whatsoever that this man could possibly turn into this monster and do what he did. And again, we want to know the answers just like everyone else. Steroids may or may not had something to do with this. Other prescription drugs, other pressures in terms of his son and his wife. I don't know. And some of this perhaps we'll never know.
He showed his true colors there, right? Because he was saying you can't taint and smear the WWE. Like, that's where his head's at. It's like, we can't use this against my company. Don't do that. Like, that's what he's worried about at this rate.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's deflecting as much as he possibly can. I think there's some points that are valid. I think speculating and, is never a good thing when it comes, especially right after something like this happens when you don't have all the facts.
True.
And, I think he's brings up some valid points of like, there could be other factors here, but obviously the main point in doing this is to trying to downplay the steroid use, because obviously he knows that tons of people on his payroll, use and abuse anabolic steroids.
Yep.
He could be on them himself even, for
True,
all we know.
yeah.
So, he's definitely trying to kind of deflect away from that and bring in other possibilities here. And also trying to downplay the liability that his company has. Cause I think that's
100%.
what she was getting at was, well, why are you, they literally found anabolic steroids in there, and it's like pretty much well known at this point that, a lot of WWE stars utilize those in order to, as part of their profession. And this is something that's been allowed. She's kind of insinuating the past and probably past tragedies that have happened with the WWE. So he's, of course, trying to save face for his brand and just trying to deflect as much as he can. But
and I appreciate that she at least pointed out his hypocrisy, because she's like, yeah, well, if this is all speculation, then why are you so confident that it isn't?
Why not be like, yeah, absolutely
It could
could have
be.
been. We don't know for sure yet, but based on the little bit of information that we do have, the fact that they did find steroids at the house and things like that, it's not completely beyond the realm of possibility to be like, could it have been? And I think the big point that he went wrong was saying that this was not a rage incident, but a deliberation, or what did he say? A deliberate act, basically, based on the fact that it happened over a series of days. But how does he know that? And
how does he know that?
Right. I thought that was definitely not a good move on his part.
Right. Talk about speculation. Like, he's claiming that he kind of has some insight into what was going on in those 3 days.
Sounds like he knows the truth and he's just not saying it. Right. Which is odd, but this absolutely could have been a rage incident. I mean, how does he know? He wasn't there. So it's definitely,
he's trying to
kind of all over the place. Yeah. I'm just kind of like trying to talk at people and, talk around the real issue here. But so let's talk about Chris's toxicology report, because probably all wondering what was revealed in that. And what the report shows is that he had elevated levels of testosterone in his urine. Some report it was more than 10 times the normal amount, which obviously suggests anabolic steroid use was involved. Medical examiners also believe this meant he had used steroids not long before he died. I mean, 10 times the normal amount. That is an absurd amount of testosterone. As many of us know, anabolic steroids are often used to achieve muscle size and definition. And in professional wrestling, where everyone looks superhuman, the pressure to achieve this figure results in pro wrestlers using anabolic steroids. I mean, it's kind of obvious, right?
Yeah, it's like an open secret. Yeah.
Because you can do some simple Google searches of like natural bodybuilders versus just other bodybuilders, and it's pretty obvious.
They don't look the same at all. Daniel was just telling me about this. I didn't know that they actually have natural bodybuilder competitions versus bodybuilder, like they are separate from each other.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's not explicitly said that they are, enhanced athletes, but there is a specific class for natural drug tested athletes. So
that's wild.
It's kind of saying it without saying it.
There's a bunch of influencers. I'm forgetting his name right now, but there's one influencer, fitness influencer, who goes around and like asks people, are you natty or not?
I've seen that guy.
What's that? I forget what that guy's name is. But he goes around to like bodybuilding conventions and stuff, and he like goes up to people and he asks them and sees if they're going to be honest about it.
Nobody's going to be
never honest.
They're never. Yeah. It's like very rare. But even then, the people are like, oh, yeah, I'm natural. And he's like,
doubt it.
The few people in the fitness industry that do actually admit to their use are people that tend to have already built their, I don't want to say financial empire, but they've built their business to be self-sustaining. So they don't need help from sponsors or anything like that. So they feel comfortable divulging this information. I found that a lot of the times the people that do hide it, they do need to survive off of those sponsorships and how well the public views them. So I understand why they're doing it. It doesn't make it right.
No.
Does that kind of make sense?
No. Well, let's like a good example of this is Liver King.
Yeah.
here's a guy that for the longest time,
Dude, it's so crazy.
fucking was like, I'm all natural. I'm on this carnivore diet and, eat raw liver every day and you'll look like me and take my supplements, of course.
selling it. Yep.
And then it came out that he's definitely juicing, and he's on human growth hormones.
Yep.
Which I'm not an expert on this, and Danny, maybe you know the answer. So is HGH, that's not considered a steroid, correct? Is that different from an anabolic steroid?
Yeah, it's different from an anabolic steroid. And in the most basic of ways I can describe it is like a steroid will help muscles, bone density, things like that, whereas human growth hormone as like blanketly helps tissue grow all over the body. And when I say tissue, that includes organs. So I don't know if you've ever seen photos of like newer age bodybuilders where they have kind of like the distended belly.
Yeah.
And it looks like their stomach's about to burst open. It's because their organs are growing inside of their stomach and it's stretching the abdominal wall.
That's crazy.
It's disgusting.
Whereas just straight steroid use, you're not going to get that, most likely.
Interesting. And then people couple them together.
Yes, people couple them together.
That's crazy, man.
Which Chris was.
Yeah.
Chris was doing
that's
both.
right. Yeah. And I believe Liver King was. I mean, you look at Liver King and you're like, there is no way, amount of like fucking cow organs is going to make me look like that.
Especially at his age.
Yes, exactly.
Like age is a huge
40
factor in this.
some years old and he looks like he's 20.
The Rock too.
Right.
The Rock's not natural.
Which we don't know. Again, we don't know.
Oh, he's not.
Yeah.
Oh, he's
Is it been proven that he's not, or
there's been a couple YouTubers who have like debunked it, but I don't care if people say, oh, it's just Islander genes. No, he is almost in his 50s and he walks around year round with abs at like 200 plus pounds. The man is on something.
Yeah, I think we all thought that.
Yeah,
sure.
Right. And we were talking about how things are just ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Like it's to get these like quote supplements before they're really
Regulated.
known and regulated. So it's always this game to try and get what's the next thing that people aren't really picking up on, you know?
Well, and there's all these like legal steroids too.
Yeah, because what was that one you were talking about, Daniel?
SARMs.
Yes, SARMs. That's like the big one. Yeah, I've looked into those a little bit.
Selective androgen receptor modulators. They're basically, I don't want to say they're basically legal steroids, but they're damn near close. They're unregulated. And I know a lot of younger kids have been experimenting with them.
Yeah.
A lot of, I hate to go on like a little tangent here about steroid use and everything, but it seems applicable here. There's been a huge influx in the past 5 or 6 years in the fitness community, especially with like younger kids in like high school, like 16 to 22, abusing, growth hormone, steroids, and SARMs. There's even a SARMs shop on my commute to work, and I see it every day, and it makes me so mad. And it's coupled with social media influencers lying about, what they're taking and how they get there, and some don't. And I give respect to the people that, even though they do take these things, they're upfront about it. But
and it's like even with the SARMs, there's no studies or clinical data backing up the side effects and long-term effects of taking these. And then, like you said, the real danger is the marketing that these fitness influencers are doing to young kids and teenagers who are like, oh, well, this is not technically a steroid. I can order it online, so it can't be bad for me, right? But yet it still has to be treated the same way as a steroid. Like if you look into it, you still got to do the cycle. There's like all this. I looked into it not because I was going to actually do it, but I was curious because I had heard about something.
Why is it popular?
Yeah, I was like, what the hell is this stuff? I was like, well, if it's clinically studied and good to go, I wouldn't mind being that. Like have look like The Rock. Like,
hey, our YouTube watchers, keep an eye on Josh, and if like in 3 episodes or something, you notice his neck is like huge or something, let us know.
You know what, Austin? I'm proud to say I am natty.
He's natty, nice.
And we can get a polygraph test.
Nice.
I've never taken anything like that.
Oh, I'm natty too. I got that natty light. That natty light body. Yeah.
Got that natty light Marlboro build over here.
Yeah, I got that indie rock body over here.
Indie rock.
Yeah, no, it's really bad. I knew somebody close to me actually who in high school at age 16 was taking Anavar. And I watched the effects that this had on them, and they got jacked very quickly. but the effects of it were pretty severe. And this person became very depressed after not even that many cycles of it. I want to say he only did a few cycles.
Especially at a young age, too.
At 16, though.
Yeah.
And it was like acne, and it got like he had all these crazy side effects, and he eventually stopped, and then, you just lose all of it anyways if you don't keep up with it.
Yeah.
And that's the real issue with it too, is you got to keep taking these steroids or SARMs in order to, you do cycle after cycle after cycle. And then the other big one you hear about now is TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, which I believe Chris was on as well. And like I believe there is some proper medical application for this.
100%.
Like, because obviously there's a lot of men that suffer from low testosterone. Your body's just not but it's like something that needs to be prescribed by a doctor. And
they do a blood test.
And they're not like giving you 10 times the normal amount. They're trying to bring you up to normal levels, not exceed the normal levels.
Exactly. Austin and I were talking about this right before, actually, and I was saying that a lot of times these the people that are on TRT, they are on TRT and they have their medically prescribed dose that is being given to them by their doctor, but then they go somewhere else, like their dealer, and they get the extra stuff. So they can still claim they're just on TRT, but they're taking an excessive dose every single time. It's lying without lying.
Yeah.
Because all that extra testosterone is just boosting muscle growth. It's just aiding recovery,
everything.
But then what is that doing to you psychologically?
Oh, it's just putting your mental health in the toilet.
Yeah. So Chris is at 10 times the normal amount according to the toxicology report.
It's important to remember
that's
that
crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just
that is
insane.
A lot.
So getting back to Chris's career, there was a lot of times throughout it that he was called too short to be a pro wrestler, and this always weighted heavy on his shoulders. Steroid use had been a problem even outside of pro wrestling. We're talking, anywhere you see a superhuman body type in the entertainment industry, especially Hollywood, as we were kind of alluding to with The Rock, right? And there's plenty of others as well, Hulk Hogan and...
and even just actors I know do steroids if they have to prep for a role. Like I would put money on any Marvel movie actor did steroids to get shredded before their roles.
You think? In all cases, or like...
I don't think in all cases. I think
depending on the person.
Yeah, I think it's some of the superhuman looking cases, like Thor in Love and Thunder.
Chris Hemsworth?
Yeah, one, I'm specifically referencing that one shirtless scene. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about, but it's when he's in front of Zeus and everything.
I
and
know
his
what
clothes
you're
here.
talking.
I've got that as a poster on my wall.
That's my screensaver. But I know specifically for like shots like that, those are planned out months in advance. So the actor has time to diet down, lose as much body fat as they can, and they pretty much go through a bodybuilding prep where they dehydrate themselves, and then maybe an hour or two before the shoot, they have some sort of like cheap carb, a little bit of water, and they do a quick little workout to basically make their veins pop and look as good as possible. That being said, I don't know if Chris was on steroids, but he definitely, because I have to keep in mind, these Hollywood actors also have all of the resources.
Right.
They have
the best trainers.
They have the best trainers. They have dietitians. They don't have to worry about their meals. It's not achievable for the average person. It's specifically for this role. That being said, I definitely think they are taking extra things to make it better. I just don't know. But I wouldn't doubt that there are Hollywood celebrities taking steroids. I mean, like we just said, like The Rock and everything.
Yeah.
Or like Zac Efron in Baywatch.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And
his abs
Iron Claw too.
Yeah.
You can see the distended belly.
Yeah.
Is it possible to get a 6-pack or an 8-pack to the point that these guys get like where it looks like individual like squares in there?
You can get it naturally for a day, maybe a week. You have to diet down to it, because if your body gets below, I think it's around like 8% body fat, that's when your hormones start to go out of whack. So 8%, which is already extremely low. Like nobody here has 8% body fat.
Hey, whoa, what are you saying about?
But that's anything past that is just dangerous.
So it's okay not to have abs, is what you're saying?
100%.
It's totally healthy, normal.
100%. Oh, thank
to have
God.
a little chub.
Having a little body fat is good for balancing your hormones. It's good for you.
I need to hear this every day.
Hype us up.
I'm like, that, I never had a 6-pack ever. And, it doesn't matter how many crunches you do. It ain't going to happen.
It's like, hard.
I'm not going to cut everything to have a 6-pack for a day.
No.
And luckily, my lady prefers no 6-pack.
Oh, sweet.
She likes the, little extra cushion down there,
Nice. Good. That's what it's about.
I know you're
really.
rocking an 8-pack under there.
Yeah, so. I got that. It looks like pieces of metal.
It is metal. Yeah. I got implants. It's that rowing machine, man.
Ooh. I'm trying to get my ass bigger, too. I think I'm going to get that implant.
Well, there's actually legitimate exercises for the glutes. So.
True. Well, I don't want to do exercise. I just want the surgery done, so it looks sweet.
So anyways, back to abusing anabolic steroids. There is a lot of insanely horrible symptoms that come along with it, including heart attack or stroke, liver or kidney failure, high blood pressure, blood clots, fluid retention, high cholesterol, aggressive behavior, mood swings, paranoia, manic behavior, hallucinations and delusions, reduced sperm count, infertility, shrunken testicles, erectile dysfunction, hair loss, breast development, increased risk of prostate cancer, severe acne, and stomach pain, just to name a few. But on top of this, the withdrawal symptoms include depression, apathy, anxiety, difficulty concentrating, insomnia, anorexia, decreased sex drive, fatigue, headaches, muscle, and joint pain. All that sound, it's like
crazy.
And that's what's scary is like, these kids don't know this, or they're just ignoring it for like the short term, because I feel like so many kids these days are all about short term gain. Like, what's going to get me to my goals faster? And I don't care about the long term effects of it. But the thing is, like, I feel like it's kind of addicting, right? Like you on them and you start seeing the results that you like. Are you just going to be like, oh, I'll just do 2 cycles and I'll stop? No. You're gonna start achieving the body that you've dreamed of, and then you're like, I want to keep this up. Right. I like how I feel and look, and
isn't that the double whammy? Even if you do stop, then you get these crazy withdrawal symptoms that are as terrible as just what the regular symptoms were.
So literally in these symptoms, we have aggression,
check,
and whether it's roid rage, but just being on anabolic steroids, that's already a side effect.
Yep. Paranoia, which would explain why Chris was getting
hallucinations and delusions, which that really takes me back to that conversation we were having earlier about why all of a sudden he's wanting to move out of his house and move down to Fayetteville. And it makes me wonder if he was having some types of hallucinations or delusions or something.
Possibly.
Or it's just severe paranoia, possibly. But because, again, investigators had found a large amount of steroids and human growth hormone in Chris's home. And people close to Chris confirmed to authorities that he was constantly taking steroids. As we mentioned, he even refused to stop his usage while recovering from his major neck surgery. So you've got painkillers, you've got anabolic steroids, because again, if you don't keep taking them and working out constantly, right? Because that's the thing with them, Danny, is that you can't it's not like somebody can just take steroids and never work out a day in their life and achieve the results they're looking for.
Yeah, you still have to put in the work. It's not a magical drug where if you just take it, you just build muscle. A lot of what steroids do is just they increase your recovery time and they increase the amount that your muscles can output. So if you think of it, like the more work your muscles do, the bigger they're going to grow. So they can, instead of like a natural lifter, they can work out, push themselves really hard in the gym, and then they need like 3-4 days to recover.
Me.
Exactly. Yeah. No, yeah. Like natural lifters.
I don't do workouts every day for that reason, because it's like I feel like I'll even get cramps, like my muscles start cramping up and it like hurts. It physically hurts to push the same muscle group every single day.
But with people that are enhanced, they're able to recover a lot faster. So they could probably take only like 1 day off and then they can get back in and work that same muscle. So they can just give more stimulus to the muscle over time, and ergo, it'll grow faster.
And I assume muscle endurance.
Yeah.
Because that's why they can do 6 hours in the gym.
Yeah, and that's why like even regular athletes take it, not even just like bodybuilders and strength athletes. Like regular athletes have gotten caught with steroids.
Totally, yeah. In all major sports.
Barry Bonds.
Barry Bonds is a great example of that. No wonder he hit so many
He
home
was
runs.
cranking those out of the park.
But yeah, that's a cheating.
Yeah.
That's totally cheating. Can't do
Yeah.
that, man. It's like, it takes the fun out of the game, when everybody's juiced up. And I mean, the NFL definitely has its fair share. And even to this day, I'll hear ex-NFL players like, yeah, definitely no, that's still going on.
Yeah.
And you look at some of these guys and you're like, they're big, but you go back. I think what's really telling is when you go look at somebody from before. You go back to like high school.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of close to your adult form by the time you're 17, 18 years old, as far as like stature and
your frame.
and usually most of us are in the best shape of our lives. At least I was in 18. Were you?
Yeah. I was a stick back then.
So you've put on some muscle since then?
That's not muscle.
But yeah, like if
It's
you
body by beer over here.
just a beer body. But that's the thing too, is you look at like an NFL player in the prime of their career, and then you look at them in high school or even college even, and there's a big difference a lot of times.
Yeah.
Because their arms are, you're like, their legs are, and you're like, and again, not saying that this is everybody, because there's definitely some just freak athletes.
Right. And the NFL does put in a lot of money into like the physicality of their players. Like they have private chefs and doctors everywhere.
Totally. Yeah. And they're on all the best supplements and protein powder. I mean, everything's down to a science.
Yeah.
I mean, they know literally what to give their athletes, but it doesn't stop some of them from
taking it to that next step.
Yeah. There's been a few recently that were like suspended a whole year for performance enhancing drugs.
Wow.
Where they get fined and they lose a whole season.
Do they still get paid, or do they get paid per game?
Well, they get paid per game. Usually their contracts are per game.
Okay.
So yeah, there's some that just literally miss out on a whole year for performance enhancing drugs. But yeah, it's like,
to your point though, I mean, Chris did reportedly, he began taking steroids in high school.
Yeah. And that's where it usually starts. I feel like, which is just sad.
Considering the withdrawal symptoms too, it's almost like an addiction, because I could see it as you take it for so long, you try to get off of it. You have this like crazy depression and anxiety kicking in. So you're kind of chemically dependent on this. So you just return to it just so you don't get those symptoms anymore. I could see that happening as well.
Yeah. Which would make you just want to keep it going.
Keep going. Yep.
Keep it going. You're like, might as well. And then then it's like, well, I'll try a little bit more and a little bit more. Cause eventually you plateau, right? And then you want to, maybe push it even more and see how far you can push yourself before you're kind of past the point of no return.
And 10 times the amount.
Well, and just going back to the side effects, you got heart attack and stroke. So you're putting all that strain on your internal organs.
And that's why, Eddie Guerrero, his friend, they attributed his drug use and the steroid use to his cardiovascular problem.
And then on top of that, if you're drinking in excess and doing any other types of drugs or prescription drugs, it's all going to compile and definitely not end well. But so let's go back to the Benoit's residence. Some of Nancy's family members actually came to stay at the house after this whole tragedy, and they discovered more vials, needles, and prescription drugs hidden in a suitcase and a walk-in closet. So again, with all this information and the media got a hold of it, that's really why they jumped on the Roid Rage theory. The idea was that because of his drug use, he flew into a frenzy, which then led him to murder his wife and son. Investigators soon turned their attention towards Chris's doctor, Dr. Phil Aston, who had been writing him prescriptions for the steroids. He claimed that Chris was undergoing, quote-unquote, testosterone replacement therapy, or TRT. He had supplied Chris with 10 months' worth of steroids every 3 to 4 weeks between May 2006 and May 2007. How does that even make sense? 10 months' worth every month, essentially.
Yep.
So so clearly he's aiding him in his abuse.
Yep. And if it's 10 months worth in 1 month, I mean, simple math there. That's why it would be 10 times the amount that they found in the system.
Which this screams major liability on his doctor.
Huge.
This is malpractice right here.
Oh, they're going to prosecute.
As they should.
Yeah.
Because clearly he's just getting money under the table or something. Chris is, or he just does this because I don't know. He likes to be the go-to guy. So since Chris had been taking growth hormones for so long, he had severely damaged his endocrine system, which is what naturally creates testosterone. Because that's like I think that's a big issue, right? Is if you're replacing the testosterone in your body, eventually your body's going to stop naturally producing it.
Exactly.
Am I wrong on that, Danny?
No, you're right.
Okay. That's what I thought. So I've done a little bit of research in this because I was, again, not for me, but because I was very interested.
Sure.
Well, I was curious there was at one point in my life where I thought I was suffering from low testosterone. And that's also a big thing you hear with which is not normal necessarily for young men, but it was something that I felt like I was going through.
Gotcha.
Turns out it was just weight gain. This was like a couple years back, and obviously I lost some weight, and then I started feeling better, and working out just kind of also helps with natural testosterone production. But I started looking into TRT and all this stuff because you start YouTubing it.
Oh,
you're
yeah.
like, and
go down the
you
rabbit
start
hole.
finding these influencers who are like, oh yeah, I'm on TRT or this supplement for testosterone replacement or whatever. And so I learned a little bit about it, but yeah, you always run the risk of having your body stop producing it naturally, which is a big problem. Then you've got to be on it forever in order for your body to create testosterone.
Right. But in very appropriate levels.
Right.
It's not like this where he's 10 times the amount.
Exactly.
Right?
At least bring it up to natural level for your body.
Exactly.
Right. It was also noted that at the time of his death, he was suffering from testicular failure, most likely due to his steroid use, which I'm not familiar with this term exactly, but I assume this is just sperm production is ceasing.
Infertility, shrunken testicles, erectile dysfunction is all a part of that.
Okay.
It definitely messes with your genitals.
So what happened to Dr. Aston? Well, he was indicted and charged for overprescribing controlled substances. Get these doctors out of here, man.
Yeah,
there's too many of these
so
doctors
unethical.
that are fucking up the good people of this country.
Yeah, that's awful.
But this didn't end with Chris. He had also been supplying other wrestlers with steroids along with large amounts of painkillers and muscle relaxers. So just a straight drug dealer.
Yes.
Operating legally.
He's got the badge.
Actually illegally, but
yeah.
It's a fucking shame.
Yeah.
His patient, Johnny Grunge, had recently died on February 16, 2006 at the age of 39. How does this guy live with himself? He knows he's contributing to the early deaths of these people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's believed that Johnny Grunge died very early in his life due to the drug abuse, that this was a significant factor to it, at least. Many other professional wrestlers use Dr. Aston for prescription medication, and many travel across the country just to see him. They're like, that's the guy.
This was the hookup, yeah.
On January 29, 2009, Dr. Phil Aston admitted he illegally prescribed drugs, sometimes without examining the patients first, which is like Doctor 101.
That's so crazy.
They always want to see you before they prescribe anything.
Right.
But he's like, nah. Just send me an email. I think that was the same situation with like Liver King too that came out.
Oh, really?
That he was just like emailing with some doctor that was like writing the prescriptions. Yeah. Dr. Aston then pleaded guilty to all 175 counts of illegally dispensing prescription drugs from 2002 until his arrest in 2007, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Good.
Yeah.
That's good, honestly. Maybe more would be better, but
honestly, that's
because you have multiple deaths.
The amount of lives that you could destroy doing this, I can't even imagine.
I mean, he is basically just a drug dealer at that point.
Yeah.
Totally. And coincidentally, he passed away from a heart attack on June 24, 2022, the same day of the year that Chris took his own life. It's pretty weird. Beyond Dr. Aston, it was also discovered that Chris had been ordering steroids illegally online from a company called MedX Life. And these orders came through the Florida-based pharmacy called Signature in late 2005 and throughout 2006. I believe the prescription drug laws down there are a little bit different. They're definitely
some loopholes.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics around it, but I'm sure somebody out there could speak to this better than I could. But I know that there's it's definitely a little bit more lenient down there than it is in other states, which is why they have a huge controlled substances problem down there.
Gotcha.
And maybe it's probably changed in recent years. I'm sure they've cracked down a bit, but for a long time, Florida was the spot for these illegal pharmacies to operate. It was later revealed that investigators had already looked into Chris Benoit over his illegal purchasing of steroids through Signature. And in the fallout of the Roid Rage scandal, the WWE tried to defend itself even further. But things weren't looking good. According to WWE's talent wellness policy, Chris was randomly tested for steroid use 4 times in 2006 and 2007. His final test results came back negative, but the WWE withheld the first 3 tests.
Come on. So he failed.
Pretty obvious. Yeah.
Yeah. Come on.
Of course. Many theorize that the WWE knew about the serious problems with heavy steroid use among the wrestlers, and after the double murder suicide, the Roid Rage debacle was the reason that they tried to quickly cut ties and erase Chris Benoit's legacy from their records. I think that's what we're all thinking at this point.
Right.
Some theorize that when Chris was tested in April 2007, the last test he took, he was truly clean. But due to the physical and psychological effects of going cold turkey, he caved and continued to use them. Others believe that he just straight up cheated on the final test. And I know there's some ex-wrestlers that have spoken about this, that there was definitely loopholes and ways around the testing. As for the medical examiner's opinion, they could not conclusively determine if steroids or the coined term Roid Rage had contributed to the double murder suicide. As for the WWE's response, one of their attorneys stated, quote, "The facts of this crime do not support the hypothesis that Roid Rage played a role in the murders." He cited evidence of premeditation and the lack of the toxicology report at the time, plus the fact that the steroids found within Benoit's home were legally prescribed. So yeah, deflect.
Yeah, right. And so, it is important to take into account the medical examiner's opinion, right? They're saying that they couldn't conclusively determine if this contributed, which is completely fair, because what we'll see quickly in this case is that it is a plethora of issues that are at play here, and all of them together might have contributed to what happened.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten into the most serious disease, really.
Yeah, exactly.
That he was suffering from.
Exactly. So we'll get into that a little bit later. Because on top of all this, regardless if Roid Rage was at play, investigators did discover that Chris's steroid use had caused a lot of the tension within his marriage. In the weeks before the tragedy, investigators discovered a series of text messages between Nancy and Chris. Nancy had repeatedly asked Chris to stop using. On May 9th, 2007, she wrote, quote, "Get off the crap you're on. It's making you passive aggressive, and I don't need the abuse." In late May, she wrote, quote, "Get off the stuff. It's obvious. I'm probably not the only one who can see, and we both know the wellness program is a joke." In January 2007, Nancy even threw out his stash of steroids in the house. Chris then stayed in a hotel for 2 weeks after a fight. After his friend Eddie had died, the couple had serious discussions about Chris leaving the WWE and possibly starting his own wrestling school, the Benoit Wrestling Academy. They had even got a business plan together and made t-shirts, but obviously this never came together. According to fellow wrestler Rob Van Dam, Chris had told him how much he respected Rob when he decided not to re-sign with the WWE when his contract was up. Chris apparently told him, quote, "Some of us don't know when to get out." Another sensitive spot in Chris and Nancy's marriage was that Chris didn't spend enough time with his children from his first marriage. Nancy often criticized him over this. Fellow wrestler Chris Jericho also confirmed that Chris would often skip holidays like Halloween and Father's Day just so he could keep training. So he seems like he's like a workaholic here. The children from his first marriage would only stay in their house about twice a year. Apparently, during one of their visits in March 2007, the children heard Nancy and Chris fighting. The fight escalated to Nancy pushing and hitting Chris, and Nancy was upset with him because he didn't make any plans with his own children while they were in town. There was also an ongoing fight over a $250,000 life insurance policy Chris had purchased for himself. But here was the problem. The beneficiaries were his ex-wife and his other 2 children. Nancy and Daniel were not included. Records show that Nancy texted Chris on May 26, 2007, saying, quote, "If you wanted your ex-wife to have your retirement fund, you would have given it to her 10 years ago at the divorce. If you want her to have more, you wouldn't have tried to hide your money. Now it's the point. We are married. I come first." Nancy had asked Chris to change the beneficiaries to her and Daniel, but Chris refused. And in the meantime, Nancy had also been abusing prescription medication and alcohol, although it's important to note that she tried to cut back in the final weeks before she died. It later became clear that Chris's drug use had affected his sex life. We were kind of talking about this a little bit, but Nancy had complained about his inability to perform to her friend Pam Clark in a 2-hour phone call on June 18th, only a few days before Chris murdered her. Pam also told authorities that Nancy complained of Chris's mood swings that seemed to be getting worse. She was also suspicious that Chris was having an affair with an unnamed WWE diva. Apparently, she had found a second cell phone, and Chris would take phone calls outside, which he rarely did. She also attended a WWE house show 2 days earlier, and she told Pam she felt uncomfortable, like people were walking on eggshells around her, possibly because they knew something was going on in their marriage. Nancy also told her mother-in-law, Margaret Benoit, that Chris was doing something wrong while out on the road with the WWE, suggesting that he had been cheating on her. Nancy had also told Pam that she was about to confront Chris about the potential affair. That's important to keep in mind because that might have been an escalating event. On top of all this, she told Pam that Chris had been physically abusive to her. She claimed she had kept evidence of the physical abuse, and if anything happened to her, she wanted to know that Chris did it. But no physical evidence of the abuse had been uncovered during the investigation. So Nancy considered another separation or even taking Daniel and leaving Chris for good, and the plan was to move to Florida to be closer to her family. When investigators interviewed Dr. Aston, who was Nancy and Chris's shared primary care physician, apparently Nancy had asked questions about raising Daniel as a single mother. This was during an appointment only 1 day before the murder.
This is huge.
This
right
is
here.
huge. So she's already talking about confronting Chris about an affair, and she's talking to their primary care physician about raising their son as a single mother only a day before the murder.
Which you put 2 and 2 together, this seems like a motive,
right?
For Chris to murder her,
right?
Especially if you look at the history that he already went through this once before, as far as, you know, the mother of his child trying to take full custody of his kids.
Yep. And a restraining order against him.
Right.
Accusations of abuse are there, violence. So, you know, unfortunately, Nancy wanting to leave Chris, this really didn't come as a shock to many who are close to them. By the end, they fought very often, and they fought about everything. And meanwhile, both Nancy and Chris were grieving the deaths of close friends while their marriage was falling apart. So it's not only like this inner turmoil, you have these outside forces that are also acting against, you know, their mental health, their well-being. Because on March 6, 2007, the wrestler known as Bad News Brown passed away at the age of 63. He was the one who got Chris into the Japanese wrestling scene in the mid-80s. And on June 15th, only a week before the double murder-suicide, a close friend of Nancy's, Sherry Martel, passed away from a drug overdose at the age of 49. With all the information to consider, investigators theorized that on the night of the murders, Nancy had told Chris that she was finally going to leave him for good while also taking their son Daniel. And they proposed that this is when Chris snapped. They also believe that alcohol and prescription drug use were involved that night. They had discovered empty beer cans, a half a bottle of wine inside the home. Unfortunately, due to decomposition and the time that had passed, the toxicology report struggled with an accurate blood alcohol content reading. Chris technically tested negative for blood alcohol. They did discover Xanax and hydrocodone in his system, but investigators said the levels were consistent with therapeutic use. And as we mentioned before, there were elevated levels of synthetic anabolic steroids in his urine, 10 times the normal amount. As for Nancy, hydromorphone, hydrocodone, and Xanax were discovered in her system. Investigators also confirmed these levels were on par with therapeutic use. Her blood alcohol level was 0.184. So the medical examiner added that it was impossible to say whether the blood findings were due to ingestion of alcohol or the, quote, postmortem process. High blood alcohol levels may develop during the decomposition, and levels up to 0.2% do not necessarily indicate that alcohol was ingested before death. So it's a little bit of a confusing area here. They're not sure if she had been actually ingesting alcohol or if this was just a part of the decomposition process, because her body, she had already been dead a few days before they found.
Which I think is pretty accurate if you think about it, especially the fact that Chris he didn't have an elevated. Yeah.
So investigators also ruled out that Nancy was drugged by Chris before she was murdered.
In the media frenzy that followed the tragedy, many reported that Daniel allegedly had the genetic disorder known as Fragile X syndrome. Many claimed that this added to the domestic problems within the family. According to the district attorney, Scott Ballard, track marks were discovered on Daniel's arm. Many theorized that Chris and his family had been giving Daniel HGH injections because he was undersized due to his condition. Medical records later confirmed that Daniel did not have Fragile X syndrome. His teachers also confirmed that he was not underdeveloped. He was physically and mentally on par with a 7-year-old, and he was generally a happy and healthy child in school. Soon after, DA Scott Ballard was forced to publicly apologize since he was the one who proposed that Daniel had track marks on his arms. The investigation could also not perform tests for steroids or HGH on Daniel because of a lack of urine. But the fact still remained that the Benoit household was filled with painkillers, muscle relaxers, anabolic steroids, and of course alcohol. Nancy's sister Sandra also confirmed that she had witnessed firsthand excessive drug use from both Chris and Nancy. Fellow wrestler Bob Holly also confirmed he knew Chris drank heavily and also used prescription drugs. He added that he knew Chris and Nancy had been fighting the weeks leading up to the tragedy, and at one point Chris had left to stay in a hotel. And on a phone call with Bob Holly, Chris confessed he'd been fucked up on a combination of pills and alcohol. On top of roid rage, substance abuse, and a failing marriage, Chris might have also been suffering from symptoms stemming from consistent head trauma throughout his career. It was proposed that Chris might have suffered from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, also known as CTE. This was first noticed in professional boxers after getting hit in the head multiple times. After fights, doctors noticed significantly reduced cognitive functions, and these functions would take a long time to return to normal levels, which Danny's done some boxing before. And he does mixed martial arts.
Yes.
Tell us some facts around this, because I was talking to you about this yesterday, and you were saying that boxers have a, like, concussion rate wise, they suffer from increased risk of concussions versus MMA. And you would think it would be the other way around, because MMA, no gloves. Well, I guess they have gloves, but they're different, right?
Yeah. So if we're looking at pure statistics, boxing is more dangerous for your brain than MMA, and it's also more dangerous for your brain than American football. A huge reason it's very prominent in boxing is because of the rule set and the fact they are wearing the heavier gloves. If you look at the statistics between regular boxing and bare knuckle boxing, it's actually shocking how much less damage the brain is taking in bare knuckle boxing, but it's compensated by an extreme increase of lacerations, cuts, bleeding, stuff like that, facial scars.
Because, the gloves in boxing are supposed to just protect your hands. They're not supposed to protect your head.
Yes, it's a really common misconception that the gloves in combat sports protect the opponent's head. It really protects your hands. The best way I describe this is like if I asked you to punch a brick wall wearing a 16-ounce boxing glove, you'd just probably let it rip. You'd be like, yeah, I want to be fine. But you take that glove off and I say, hey, punch that brick wall, you're not going to throw it very hard.
Right.
And it really translates to how much damage your opponent is taking at the end of the day.
Which makes sense for the sport, right?
Yeah.
Because as soon as the hand's out of order,
you can't punch anymore.
There's no fighting point.
Exactly.
Right. So that makes sense. And that's all you're doing. In boxing, you're standing up, fighting.
Exactly.
As opposed to MMA, you're also going to the ground.
Exactly.
There's multiple styles.
In boxing, if you knock your opponent down after they get hit really hard in the head, they have a standing 8 count. So they have up to 8-10 seconds to stand up and continue fighting to continue to take more damage. Whereas in MMA, if someone gets dropped, their opponent is going to follow them to the ground and possibly give them more damage, but they can still defend themselves, and the ref will probably stop it a lot faster than they would at boxing.
Have you ever had a concussion?
Not once. I protect this thing up here.
Good.
It's my good buddy. Well,
Never?
sometimes
have you ever hit your head?
I've hit my head for sure.
Hard?
One time my brother threw this huge inflatable ball at me, but I was holding an old school wooden bat behind my head, and the ball hit the bat, and the bat like cracked my skull. But I don't think it was
On the back of the
it
head?
didn't actually crack my skull, but yeah, on the back of my head. That was the only
That's
like
dangerous.
kind of severe. I had a lump, but I didn't have a concussion. That's like the only head injury that I've really had.
That's really good. I've had one instance where I think I got a mild concussion from slamming my head on going down the stairs, where there's like a low ceiling there, and just like walking at full force, like running, kind of like jogging down the stairs, and the front of my head, and I was definitely like dizzy and just kind of like, got the really bad headache, kind of like seeing a little stars for a second. But the worst for sure time I got like a real concussion was on my bachelor party. Surprising. I'm dead serious, dude. Kind of a funny story, but also kind of scary.
Where'd you go for your bachelor party?
Steamboat. I went to Steamboat Springs,
okay.
and I was having a great day. Come back to the room, and I'm sitting at the table. Or no, I came back to the room and I went outside and smoked a blunt. And I was drinking, and this blunt was strong, baby. It was the first time I had smoked a blunt in a long time.
And that blunt gave you a concussion. It was that strong.
It was so strong. And it was also before I was like, doing nicotine. So it was like I think it was the nicotine from the blunt. And I smoked like a whole one to myself, like the whole thing. And I sat down at the table. Then all of a sudden I got really dizzy and I passed out sitting at the table. And you know how hotel floors are like hard as shit?
Yeah.
There's not like nice cushy carpet. I literally fell out of my chair sideways. Oh, as my buddies are sitting at the table, and I fell and went head first. And I slammed the back of my head on the hotel floor, and I was out cold.
Oh my God.
And it was almost to the point where they were considering, you could ask my brother about this sometime, but he was
calling
like,
911
he almost
or something.
called 911,
Yeah.
but he was worried that because we were smoking marijuana, which it was legal.
They're like, yo, Josh
Yeah.
might die right
Right.
now, but don't call the cops.
But everybody's been smoking weed, so
Yeah,
everybody's
yeah.
like, oh shit. And I'll remember like coming to and like, hey bro, are you okay?
Oh
You
my
okay?
God.
And I had forgotten what had just happened.
Oof.
I had the worst headache I had ever had in my life. Like so much so the night ended there. I was like, I need to go lay down and go to bed. And I had like I had this severe pain in the back of my head. And I think and of course I didn't go to a doctor like a dummy, but I for sure had a concussion that day. Cause I've never experienced anything like it. And it makes sense for how hard, 200 some pound dude head first from a chair
God.
onto the floor.
Oh, that sounds brutal.
But luckily that's like the worst incident. I played football in middle school and stuff, and I never luckily had any concussions, or I played other sports as well, but luckily never had any serious head trauma.
Yeah.
But it's like one of those conversations that as a parent now that Kendall and I have is we are like not going to let our kids play
contact sports
like football. Like, and I love football. I'm a huge football fan. But I won't let my kids play it because it's like, I just think the risk is too high and it's not worth it.
Yeah, I think that's becoming more of a common thing nowadays because we know the risks a bit more.
Right. The symptoms of CTE were first noticed in professional boxers after getting hit in the head multiple times. And after fights, doctors noticed significantly reduced cognitive functions, and these functions would take a long time to return to normal levels. Some suffered from memory loss, movement problems, and failing social skills, including abnormal behavior and mood disturbances. This was originally called punch-drunk syndrome, and other symptoms include confusion, disorientation, dizziness, and headaches. Neuroscientist and former WWE wrestler Christopher Nowinski argued that Chris had been suffering from repeated, untreated concussions throughout his career, and this ultimately led him into an unstable mental state.
So to call back, we know that Chris was so dedicated just getting back out there at whatever the cost. Like he was going out there with injuries and then injuring it even further. So this wouldn't surprise me if Chris was just getting back into the ring after an injury. we know he was super dedicated to this.
Right. And that's the thing too, is a lot of the injuries in the WWE are real, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And you remember when they'd smash the steel chairs over each other's heads?
Yeah.
And then they'd have like gushing blood and stuff. So those are real injuries going on there. They go through tables and hit the ground or fall out of the ring and then just hit the hard floor. So imagine having that happen over a period of over a decade, over and over and over again, and not getting proper treatment for that. And then obviously the repeated head trauma is what's going to contribute to CTE, right?
Yeah.
The brain degeneration of CTE is associated with Parkinson's, progressive dementia, memory loss, confusion, impaired judgment, impulse control problems, aggression, depression, and even suicide. According to Christopher Nowinski, Chris, quote, was one of the only guys who would take a chair shot to the back of the head. That's brutal, man. I mean, and these were steel chairs.
That's no longer allowed, as we'll see by the end of this.
The back of the head is also the worst place to get hit.
Is it?
That's why it's not allowed in any combat sport.
That makes sense. So Chris had been known for his risky wrestling styles early on, and of course had suffered countless blows to the head for decades. Michael Benoit, Chris's father, agreed to have his son's brain analyzed by neurosurgeons who had been researching CTE in football players. And on September 5th, 2007, Julian Bales, the chief of neurosurgery at West Virginia University, announced the results of Chris's postmortem brain examination. He said, quote, "We have now confirmed multiple concussions are part of his medical history along with clinical symptoms associated with CTE. The findings suggest there may be a common syndrome among athletes who suffer multiple head injuries in contact sports." He also claimed that Benoit's brain was so severely damaged it resembled the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. Let that sink in for a moment.
That's a wild claim.
Holy smokes. Julian Bales and his colleagues concluded that repeated concussions could lead to dementia, which can cause severe behavioral problems. Other tests also concluded that his brain tissue revealed severe CTE, and there was damage to all 4 lobes of his brain as well as his brain stem. In December 2009, nearly 30 months after Chris's death, they confirmed that the death of another WWE wrestler, Andrew Martin, also known as Test, was attributed to CTE. Julian Bales said, quote, "With Andrew Martin as a second case, the WWE and the sport in general have to ask themselves, is this a trend? The science tells us that jumping off of 10-foot ladders and slamming people with tables and chairs is simply bad for the brain."
Right.
WWE claimed that the findings were speculative. Of course.
Yeah, of course.
They also said the research surrounding CTE was new at the time, which is like, come on, guys. Mm-hmm. This is such a piss poor
And the speculative
response.
Quote is the same thing they used for the Roid Rage accusations.
Right.
Oh, this is just speculation. They love using that.
So the WWE released the following statement to ESPN for Outside the Lines, and it reads, "While this is a new emerging science, the WWE is unaware of the veracity of any of these tests, be it for Chris Benoit or Andrew Martin. Dr. Amalu claims that Mr. Benoit had a brain that resembled an 85-year-old with Alzheimer's, which would lead one to ponder how Mr. Benoit would have found his way to an airport, let alone been able to remember all the moves and information that is required to perform in the ring." What do you make of that? Do you think that's a valid point? Or?
I think that's fair because I do they did say that verbatim, 85-year-old with Alzheimer's. And I think that is an incredibly bold claim.
But are they saying that that means he had Alzheimer's?
No, I think they're just
or
saying
just comparing
this,
brain to brain.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this looks the same.
Because they can actually look and see the damage to the brain.
Right. Yeah. So I think maybe it was taken out of context a little bit, but I think it's fair to say like, hey, we actually have evidence that he was still operating fairly normally, but I don't know. The problem is that they're making it sound like CTE had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, they're
That's
trying to. Sounds like they're discrediting CTE being real at all,
right? Yeah.
Which is scary.
Mm-hmm.
And what's crazy about CTE, if you don't know, that even after you stop these physical contact sports and your head never hits anything ever again,
mm-hmm.
this is a degenerative disease. So it will continue to spread throughout the brain over years to come.
Yeah.
And just get worse and worse. And that's what's I mean, that to me is like one of the most terrifying things to think about, is that if it just starts, then it will spread. No matter if you obviously, if you continue it, it's just going to
get worse and worse. Yeah.
But even if you stop, it's already too late. And that's why I think people, I think it's smart to really think about, do you put your kid at risk to even have this begin at a certain point in time? And I think that's such a important conversation to be had. But then, I mean, it gets into all these other things, like, should people even be allowed to do combat sports or physical contact sports? And I think ultimately everybody has control of their body and freedom over their body.
Sure.
But I think as a parent, like, I feel like you have a responsibility to protect your child. And I think it's a really difficult conversation to have and situation to navigate. What if your kid loves football or loves MMA or, boxing and that's like what they're good at? And do you stop them from doing that because about CTE and the effects of it? Or is that their decision to make? I mean, yeah, we don't have to try to figure that out right now, but I
don't know the answer. I mean, personally, just for me, I don't think I would allow my kid to play football or do boxing. Yeah, I would be like, hey, and here's why, even if you think this is unfair, maybe, let's talk it out. And maybe if I have a kid one day, I'll direct them, go listen to the old Chris Benoit Lights Out episode that we covered, and you might have a different take on if you want to do these contact sports or not.
Which, to be fair, and Danny can attest to this, that you can still do a lot of these sports without actually taking shots to the head. Because you even were saying, too, that training is like so different now than what it used to be with these sports.
And a lot of the times, these fighters and boxers and everything, a lot of the times their CTE gets so bad because they're taking so many shots in training. I mean, these guys only fight 3 times a year on a busy year. So that's 3 times a year where they're getting hit hard in the head, which is still bad, don't get me wrong. But compared to getting hit in the head every single week, several times a week, that's where the real damage is going to come from. And the culture in fighting sports, especially MMA, has really shifted in the past 15 years, especially with, how it's become more mainstream, things like that, where there's more of a prioritization on not getting injured in training and essentially saving your brain for when you're getting paid.
And isn't grappling and wrestling becoming a bit more common in MMA, or is that MMA? Is that not a trend we're seeing? Or
it's not really a trend that we're seeing. I mean, people still train it because they need to. Because if you're bad at it, you're going to get beaten there.
Right.
Sean O'Malley.
I know. Jiu-jitsu, especially jiu-jitsu, has really blown up among like casual MMA fans because it is a safe way to train. You're almost guaranteed to not get any head injuries in it. So a lot of people do gravitate towards that. If I do have a child, I do want them to train jiu-jitsu, at least for self-defense purposes. Whether or not they compete, and I don't care. I just want them to train in it. I'd love for my child to even train in MMA. And I say train, not compete, because I don't want to make them compete. I don't care if they compete, but I just want them to be able to physically handle themselves. And I think there's a big misconception. I'm sorry for going on an MMA tangent, but I think there's a big misconception on what training MMA is. And you don't have to train, you don't have to fight if you train MMA. You can train MMA for your own purposes. You can train it for fitness. You can train it for fun, and you can really minimize getting hurt. Like it's much safer to train it than I think a lot of people think. And it really depends on the culture of where you're training. That being said, it's still a contact sport. There is still always inherently a risk, and that needs to be addressed. And all of the athletes that go into it are aware of those risks.
For sure.
Yeah, I think it's all really valid. I think the issue is like, when talking about the professional sports, people want to watch people get hit in the head.
100%. They want to see.
That's the God honest truth. Like, people were complaining about some of the fights recently because there's too much ground fighting going on. People don't want to watch dudes rolling around on the ground.
Whoa. I love watching dudes roll around on the ground.
Some of us do enjoy it because I think some of the submission moves are even cooler to me than just somebody getting knocked out. Right?
I also think it's more technical. The totally, grappling and the wrestling.
The grappling is definitely.
Yeah, because just body shots aren't as technical. I mean, well, they are. I'm not going to pretend like I know a bunch about MMA, but I think
Well,
I
if
always,
you're-
when
yeah.
I watch wrestling, I'm
Right.
like, whoa, this is actually more fascinating watching them move
The takedowns
toward their
and-
bodies.
totally,
and,
yeah.
Get out of grappling moves and stuff is cool.
But people love
They want
the big
blood.
knockouts.
They want
They want blood. They want mouth guard leaving the mouth.
And that's not even just in combat sports. I mean, you probably
Yeah.
heard the joke like people watch NASCAR for the crashes.
Right.
Like-
Yeah. And I mean, this goes to kind of loop it back to WWE. That's what people wanted to see. They wanted to see the chair shots to the back of the head because it's like, oh, well, if this is theater, we still want to see some real shots and we want to see some blood too. Right. And so
We want a spectacle.
that
Well, it wouldn't
goes
be
back-
like even close to legit. It would be a theater show if there's no blood at first.
everyone's spotless.
Yeah. There's no sweat, no
Yeah.
nothing. You know.
Their hair is perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. See, nobody would want to watch that, and the WWE knows that, so they've got to put some of that. It's a risk in there.
And that's why people were willing to take shots to the back of the head.
Yeah. Well, in the following decade, postmortem brain research on several deceased wrestlers found more evidence of CTE. Wrestlers diagnosed postmortem included Axl Rotten, Balls Mahoney, Jimmy Snuka, Mr. Fuji, and Ron Bass. Inspired by the $765 million NFL settlement over player head injuries in 2013, professional wrestlers decided to go after the WWE. Over 60 professional wrestlers and representatives of deceased wrestlers filed a class action lawsuit against WWE. They claim the company concealed the risks of injury in wrestling, specifically CTE. United States District Judge Vanessa Lynn Bryant dismissed the lawsuits in September 2018. An appeal was rejected in September of 2020. And the United States Supreme Court declined to hear the case in April 2021. It's pretty wild, which again, I think it's probably, if I had to guess, it'd be because how they didn't know about it. So how could they inform them about CTE?
Right. Because they're like, oh, this is
per
kind of
se.
a new thing.
Right.
But
I'm sure there's a waiver for like injury risks, right?
Right. Yeah. There's
That they signed as a part of their contract. I'm sure they like covered, otherwise this would have happened years prior.
Right.
But-
And I think a lot of people forget about that NFL settlement too.
Yeah.
That was 2013. That was over 10 years ago. Almost $1 billion.
That's
$765 million settlement. So that's like it's real.
Right.
We know it's real. We know this is a serious issue.
Which makes sense for why they're at higher risk than even MMA fighters, is because they're out there for 18 weeks back to back to back, getting in car accidents, as many NFL players call it, every single week. They have a week turnaround before they're out there smacking heads again. You know, like everybody on the field. I was watching football yesterday and I'm like,
Same.
how many headshots, every single guy in the field's probably taking a shot to the head or clashing their head with another helmet, rattling their brain at least once per game. And then you've got the real bad ones where guys go limp on the field and they have to cart them out, which is clearly a serious concussion. And then they have the concussion protocol now. It's like, take them to the blue tent. They have to pass the independent neurological evaluation. And in recent years, they've taken it more seriously. But I mean, I think a lot of players are starting to really think about, and I think it's changing the longevity of NFL players, of like, how many serious shots can you take before you got to hang it up and you retire and your career's ended far earlier than you ever expected. And so I think we're going to see, I mean, we're already seeing it, just injuries in general in the NFL, but concussions.
Yeah.
A lot of guys are like bailing out of their careers right in the prime because they're like, this ain't worth it, man.
Yeah,
it's just a game.
Yeah.
You know, my family matters more. But I still feel like the NFL does not really like promote or talk about, you would think out of all of the foundations and research to fund, they should be funding CTE research, right? But it's always something else. It's always something more random and more pretty for PR purposes.
For sure.
And not to say that, breast cancer awareness and research is absolutely important, critical, but it's always interesting to me that CTE never, enters the conversation when they should be leading the funding for CTE research and
I think there's some
treatment.
Self-preservation going on for.
Well, they know that the more talks that happen, it might just end football as we know it, right? What is it going to be, touch football? And who's going to watch that? Then what happens to this multi-billion-dollar corporation, right? Yeah, it's a big issue. But how much Chris's CTE contributed to the double murder suicide is still up for debate to this day. But it's clear that his brain trauma and CTE must have contributed to serious problems in his life. His autopsy had also revealed that his heart, along with several other organs, were enlarged. Nancy's sister Sandra claimed that the medical examiner told her family that if the tragedy never happened, Chris still would have died within 10 months due to his poor health. That's pretty crazy. There are also several conspiracy theories surrounding the case, including a hit being put out on Chris by the WWE and a potential drug-related crime. But Nancy's family has vocalized that those theories are disrespectful to the tragedy that occurred, which I 100% agree with. It's so irrelevant.
Yeah.
So obviously we're not going to get into those out of respect for the victim's family, because at the end of the day, the most important thing in this is that two innocent people who this should have never happened in the first place, but
Right.
two innocent people, including a young child, lost their life.
Yeah, it's horrific. So in February 2008, the Fayetteville County Sheriff's Department released its official report on the tragedy. So this is their official conclusion. Chris had acted alone and murdered his wife, Nancy, on the evening of Friday, June 22nd. He then killed his son, Daniel, a few hours later. By the early morning hours of Sunday, June 24th, Chris then killed himself. The case was officially closed, but unfortunately, many questions still remain unanswered. In the aftermath, with Chris's death allegedly linked to steroid abuse, the WWE was investigated by the United States House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. They specifically targeted their talent wellness policy, but no action was taken against the WWE or any other professional wrestling company following the double murder-suicide. But in January 2009, Henry Waxman, who was the chairman of the committee, requested that the chief of the Office of National Drug Control Policy look into steroid use in professional wrestling and take appropriate steps to address that problem. In his letter, he stated that the WWE's testing program revealed that 40% of wrestlers had tested positive for steroids and other drugs. And this was after they had already been warned in advance that they were going to be tested. And this isn't even including the people who possibly went around the system, maybe got somebody else's urine or something like that, certain loopholes. He also noted that the wrestlers who tested positive only received light punishment and could still participate in wrestling events afterward. Their investigation uncovered how easily wrestlers could use the excuse of, quote, therapeutic use exemptions. When Henry Waxman's committee interviewed Tracy Ray, a physician contracted by the WWE, Tracy claimed there was, quote, shadiness in almost every therapeutic use exemptions case that I've reviewed. 2014, the University of Eastern Michigan conducted research on why pro wrestlers seem to die so young. They studied a pool of 557 former wrestlers, and of the 62 wrestlers in this group who died between 1985 and 2011, 49 died before the age of 50. 24 of the 49 died before the age of 40, and 2 even died before the age of 30. So mortality rates from wrestlers aged between 45 and 55 were 2.9 times greater than the rate for men in the U.S. population. Cardiovascular disease was the most common cause of death. And as we mentioned with Eddie, cardiovascular disease, it's connected to drug abuse.
Especially at men this age.
Yes, exactly. And especially with anabolic steroid use. A WWE spokesman said, quote, unfortunately, some past performers were part of a generation of wrestlers who made unhealthy and poor personal lifestyle choices, which in some cases continued beyond their years in the ring. To this day, WWE pro wrestlers are not provided health insurance, although they are required to have it to perform.
That is an atrocity.
Yeah.
They don't even provide health insurance.
Nope.
So I wonder if they're all like 1099 contractors or something.
Probably. Yeah.
To keep their costs down. That's crazy. Even though it's a fucking theater show now, theater program.
It's pretty clear. I mean, whatever you want to take away from steroid use or whatever, the WWE does not have the wrestlers' best interest at heart here.
No.
They want to entertain and they want to make money, but what cost?
Right. Yeah. The WWE took a huge hit after the Chris Benoit tragedy, along with the CTE debates and questions about drug abuse among their performers. Things only got worse when the investigation into Medic's Life and Signature Pharmacy opened up. Several more professional wrestlers on the WWE's roster were caught purchasing illegal performance-enhancing drugs. This was well after their original talent wellness policy was in effect, which this resulted in a slew of suspensions and firings at the WWE. As for the steroid distribution investigations, 17 people later pled guilty. After the congressional investigations, WWE was forced to change its drug testing policies, making them more strict. And after the CTE controversy, the WWE banned the use of props being used to strike wrestlers in the head. Which again, that's better than nothing.
Right.
You know, at least they're doing something, not nothing. But it seems like they were kind of forced, right, into doing these things. After the crackdowns, premature deaths for pro wrestlers declined in the following years. The WWE reduced their level of violence and also removed blood and foul language from their shows. On July 22nd, 2008, the channel officially became TV PG programming. The move was made to become more family-friendly, in other words, more advertiser-friendly, right? What's the real motivation here? But no matter how far they distance themselves from steroid use, CTE, and the fallout of the Chris Benoit double murder suicide, some argue that professional wrestling's reputation has never fully recovered. Allegedly, Chris's ex-wife Martina found what appeared to be a suicide note tucked inside Chris's Bible that was given to her after the tragedy. One passage apparently said that he was, quote, preparing to leave the earth. The rest of the contents have not been shared publicly. Considering all the factors leading up to that tragic day, the complications from CTE, the religious Google search of the prophet Elijah, the Holy Bibles placed near the bodies, the substance and alcohol abuse, and the 2 decades of steroid and performance-enhancing drug abuse to achieve the superhuman physique, as well as a long list of health problems, and all of this going on while inside of a failing marriage, what was once Chris Benoit's success story of perseverance and hard work paying off is now considered one of the worst tragedies in entertainment history. And again, answering the question why, I feel will never fully be answered. I just don't think there's any way to know. I mean, unless you were there, I don't think there's any way to know exactly what happened. But I think the theory the police proposed has a lot of credence to it based on evidence and circumstances, that he snapped because she was telling him, I want to leave. And he snapped, you know, it was out of rage ultimately, it feels like. But again, we don't know. So,
yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, what a tragic story. And I wanted to add to that, it sounds like, just to put the WWE on blast one more time.
Yeah, I'm for it.
Fuck the WWE. Like, I stopped watching them years ago.
Yeah.
It's just a fucking lame theater show at the end of the day. And the fact that they don't take care of their people is really sad. And even worse, they don't take care of their wrestlers' families, because in the wake of all of this, Sandra, Nancy's sister, as well as Chris's surviving children, never even heard from the WWE. I think Chris Jericho was the only person who was active in the WWE that reached out to him, and as well as Chavo Guerrero. The two of them were the only people affiliated with the WWE that ever even reached out to Chris's family and Nancy's family to see how they were doing. But they got no support, no communication from the WWE.
It's disgusting.
Which is fucking a crime in itself, honestly. So it's, absolutely tragic what happened. And I mean, I think if there is one little shred of positive that came from this, is that, you know, we're starting to take the serious long-term side effects of these sports and the injuries more seriously now, and more research is being done. Dr. Nowinski, the former wrestler, I think what he's doing is awesome, amazing.
Agreed,
he left being a professional wrestler to become a neuroscientist and studying this, because I think
he could see the writing on the wall, I think. Which is why he was interested in it.
Totally, which we need more people like that, because I think we got to start really looking at this and taking it more seriously, because not only is it bad for the person suffering from CTE, but it also poses a risk to those around them.
True. Yeah.
Because this is not the only incident of somebody with CTE murdering somebody else. I mean, there's plenty of stories of, the big Aaron Hernandez, that whole story.
Did you guys cover him on?
No, we've never covered Aaron
okay.
Hernandez. Maybe we'll cover that at some point. And I mean, there's more to that story than just CTE, but there's plenty of other examples.
With this story,
yeah, totally. There's other things going on. So not to say that this was only caused as a result of CTE,
right?
But as far as couple that with the steroid use, alcohol, prescription abuse, the side effects stemming from that. Then you have the effects of CTE contributing to that, and then you also have the toxic relationship going on. It creates this perfect storm, so to speak.
Yeah.
That ultimately ends in a horrible, horrible tragedy.
Yeah.
There's a really great documentary series called Dark Side of the Ring.
Yeah, Vice did it. Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was interesting because you get to hear a lot of like firsthand experiences from those closest to him, including Chavo and Chris Jericho, as well as from David, Chris's son from his first marriage, is interviewed in that. And just watching that really gave me a lot of perspective because it just shows how horrible this was and how traumatic this was for him. And it just his family. And again, he was too young to know about all these other things that were going on, but it just absolutely destroyed him for many years.
Yeah.
And it also destroyed the two families, Nancy's family and Chris's family, and they didn't speak to each other for a long, long time. And you get to see this scene where it was actually Chris Jericho. Shout out Chris Jericho. He was
great,
like a good dude.
And in that episode, he was great. Yeah, he's got the friendly dad thing going on now.
Totally. Yeah, Chris Jericho actually brought them back together, and that was like a very healing moment for them, which was really cool to see.
It's also weird to note. It's kind of hard to find that Dark Side of the Ring series. I think I had to watch it on like Daily Motion or something. I don't know.
I think it's for free on Daily Motion. It's also on Hulu.
Oh, is it? Okay.
It is on Hulu. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's Dark Side of the Ring season 2, episode 1 and 2, I believe, from that. It's a 2-parter, but it's really well done. And if you want to hear more of like firsthand experience and what they went through throughout this whole ordeal.
Nancy's sister is in it quite
Sandra,
a bit.
Yep. Very, very well done.
Yeah.
Highly recommend watching it. And yeah, if I can find the link for it, I'll link it below. So if you have Hulu, you can check it out. But yeah, I think we're going to wrap up today's episode there. It was a heavy one. Yeah. Definitely a need to decompress. There's just a lot to process, a lot to wrap your head around, so many different factors going on. But we appreciate you for joining us, and hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Lights Out. We'll see you next week, and until then, lights out, everybody.